I've been living in this world for 20 years now, ever since I crossed over. My name is Wang Hu, and I live in Anil Village, a small place tucked against the massive Green Bull Mountains in Liang Province. Today, Li Ernyo came running to my gate, shouting that officials from the county had arrived. I knew right away what it meant. The court was handing out wives again. They do this every 3 years out here on the border. Life is hard in Liang Province. We sit right between three powers, the Great Qian Dynasty, the Northern Li Kingdom, and the Chang barbarians, so war never really stops. To keep people from running away, the court gives young men wives, mostly women captured from enemy lands. I jumped up and ran with Ernyo to the east end of the village. The whole place was already gathered under the big willow tree. People called out to me as I pushed through. I'm well known around here, the best hunter within 10 villages. I've been going into the mountains since I was 17, and I bring back more game than everyone else combined. While most families barely have enough to eat, I've got stored grain and dried meat at home. That's why the young widows in the village are always finding excuses to walk past my door. My secret is something nobody knows about. When I turned 18, I awakened a hunting system. Every time I kill a creature, I have a chance to earn random attribute points: strength, speed, stamina. By now my body is far beyond any normal person. I can't rip a tiger apart with my bare hands yet, but no ordinary beast can hurt me either. That's my real advantage in this chaotic world. I stood next to old village chief Zhao Tian and watched a long column of soldiers and officials march toward us from the mountain pass. There were way more than usual. The chief stroked his short white beard and explained, Great Qian had won a big victory, smashed through more than 10 cities of northern Li, and captured hundreds of thousands of people. 9 out of 10 were women. So this time, every man in the village would get his pick. The chief's son, Zhao Da, a big, dark-faced bully who always tries to compete with me, was already demanding 2 wives with wide hips. I just smirked. Ernyo asked me to take him hunting before winter since his family didn't have enough food. I told him not to worry, bring the boys along in a couple days, and I'd make sure they all came back loaded. Then the head constable arrived, tall and arrogant, hand on his sword. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He announced the prefect's order. Every man in Liang Province between 18 and 40 must report to the garrison at the district capital within 1 month. Anyone who disobeys will be executed. So that's the deal. They give us wives, and in return, we go to war. The constable told everyone to settle down and explain the deal. Any man who hasn't gotten a wife before can pick up to 2 women, plus 2 stones of grain and 2 taels of silver. But that silver is settling in money. We have 1 month to report to the garrison in the district capital. If we don't show up, the wives get taken back, and we get our heads chopped off. Village Chief Zhao let his son Zhao to pick first, of course. That big oaf grabbed 2 sturdy, wide-hipped women, the type everyone here values because they can bear children and survive hard times. One by one, the village men made their choices. By the time my turn came, about 40 or 50 women were left, mostly the thin, delicate-looking ones nobody wanted. Then I heard the system chime in my head. For each companion selected, receive 1 random attribute point. My eyes lit up. Normally I have to kill dozens of animals just to get a few points, and most kills give nothing at all. But now 1 wife, 1 guaranteed point? That's a gift from heaven. I asked the constable if I could skip the silver payment and take more women instead. He looked me up and down, doubting my skinny frame could handle it. He doesn't know I'm the type who looks lean-clothed but solid underneath. I told him I wanted to leave behind heirs before heading off to war. That convinced him. He said I could pick up to 5, but no more. I walked along the rows and picked out 3 women right away. They all looked plain and dirty, but I could tell they were hiding their true appearances on purpose. The tall one on the right had bound her chest flat and wore oversized clothes to disguise her figure. Her eyes were deep and striking, but she kept her head down so nobody would notice. The other 2 were slender with delicate features. Even caked in mud, their beauty showed through. Then 2 more women stepped forward on their own. They called me husband and said they were willing to follow me. Their eyes were soft and full of emotion. I agreed and took them too. 5 women, 5 attribute points. But the constable blocked me. He said I could take the other 4, but not the tall one, the one named Xiao Jinji. I saw the dirty look in his eyes. He wanted her for himself. Jinji trembled and said she was willing to go with me. The constable threatened to throw her into the military camp as a comfort woman if she talked back. Her 2 sisters, Jin Yue and Jin Shu, dropped to their knees and begged me to save her. Jinji pulled them up, tears in her eyes, telling them to forget about her and just live well. The constable ordered his men to take her away. I couldn't just stand there. I spoke up and said I wanted to make a deal. He laughed and asked what a village hunter could possibly offer. I offered 2 stones of grain. He sneered. Then I gritted my teeth and raised it to 5 taels of silver, my entire savings, enough to feed a family of 4 for 3 months. That caught his attention. He smirked and said I must really fancy this woman if I was willing to spend everything I had. I told him I just didn't want to see the sisters torn apart. The constable smirked and named his price, 10 taels of silver. I begged him to lower it, but he wouldn't budge. So I gritted my teeth, bent down, and dug out 10 taels of broken silver I'd hidden inside my pant leg. That was everything I had. He took the money, wished me a happy marriage with a mocking grin, and marched off with his men toward the next village. Old village chief Zhao stomped his foot and called me a fool, said a woman skinny as a tree trunk wasn't worth 10 taels. I just laughed and said you can't put a price on what you want. Then I called out to my 5 wives to follow me home. Behind me, I could hear Zhao seething with jealousy, muttering about how I'd never be able to feed 5 women. The chief quietly noted that once I left for the army, 5 pretty wives sitting at home alone would attract trouble. He'd also seen through Jinji's disguise by now, recognized her as a noblewoman from a wealthy family. Back at my yard, I sat down in my bamboo chair and told the 5 of them to wash up at the well. The 2 women who'd volunteered, they went right away without hesitation. But the 3 sisters just stood there. Jinji thanked me for saving her and said she'd pay back the 10 taels someday. That annoyed me. I told her she had nothing to pay me with and reminded her to call me husband, like she was supposed to. Her younger sister Jinhua tugged her sleeve and said I was a good man. That without me, she really would have ended up as a camp prostitute. The other sister, Jinshu, said their old home in Northern Li was gone and they should accept their new life. Jinji sighed, apologized, and finally called me husband. I told them to cook something. There was salted meat and rough rice in the kitchen. Their stomachs were growling so loud I could hear them from my chair. When the 5 of them came back after washing up, I couldn't believe my eyes. Every single one was beautiful. Jinji was the most stunning, tall and graceful with a face like a painting, long black hair to her waist, and those deep autumn water eyes still carrying a hint of defiance. Jinhua and Jinshu turned out to be twins, about 18, with delicate little faces full of youthful energy. The other 2, Lu Yenner and Liang Shishir, were curvy and gorgeous, the kind of women who turn heads even without makeup. I had them line up and introduce themselves. Yenner spoke first, 22, with a beauty mark by her lip. Then Shishir, 21, with a flirtatious charm about her. Jinji just stated her name and age, 23, voice flat and cold. Jinhua quickly explained that her sister had been about to get married back in Northern Li before being captured. She hadn't adjusted yet. Hearing that, I stood up, grabbed Jinji by the waist, tilted her chin up, and kissed her hard. She struggled, but I didn't let go until she was gasping for air. Her face turned bright red and her eyes filled with tears. I told her I didn't care about any old engagement. From today on, I was her man. She said even if I had her body, I'd never have her heart. I told her I didn't need her heart. I just needed her to carry on the Wang family line. 10 taels of silver was too much to waste. Little Jinhua quickly hugged my arm and sweetly promised that she and Jinshu would serve me well. I tapped her on the nose and told her she and her sister were the sensible ones. That evening, the sunset painted the sky red and the whole village was buzzing with excitement. Every household that got wives was celebrating. I set up 2 tables in my little fenced yard with some simple dishes and wine. Li Ernyo showed up first with a few of the younger guys. Little Yuer brought 2 grass carp, Gowa carried 2 jugs of wine, and Zhang Dashin came grinning with 2 old hens his mother sent, wishing me lots of sons. Good brothers, all of them. Then a little girl with pigtails, Tianyo, came bouncing through the gate asking for sweets. I waved her over and handed her a packet of honey candy I'd prepared. Her parents followed right behind, my 3rd uncle Wang and his wife. They're not really my blood relatives, but they've treated me like their own son ever since their 2 boys died young. They're only in their 40s, but look like they're 60. That's what hard living does to people out here. 3rd uncle couldn't believe I'd actually taken 5 wives. He started worrying about how I'd feed 6 mouths. Normal families take 1 wife. Even the village chief's family only dared take 2. I told him not to worry. I could handle 5, even 10. He shook his head and said if it got too hard, I could always sell a few. I just laughed it off. I sent him in third and inside to the main room to sit in the seats of honor, then went to fetch my brides. When I pushed open the door to the West Room, the 5 of them were sitting around a wooden table with very different expressions. Jinji looked resigned, like she'd accepted her fate. The twins Jinhua and Jinshu were blushing with girlish shyness. Yin'er and Shishir had confident little smiles on their faces, looking at me with bold, expectant eyes. I'll admit, I'm not a bad-looking man. 6'2", solid build, strong features with a touch of refinement. Matchmakers used to come knocking all the time, but they only ever offered me big, stocky farm girls. Not my type. That's why I'd stayed single until now. Jinhua picked up a red cloth from the table and draped it over Jinji's head as a bridal veil. Then she and Jinshu covered each other. Yin'er and Shishir did the same. The veils were really just red square cloths I'd cut. I couldn't afford real wedding dresses. I'd thought about getting proper red gowns for all 5, but with less than 10 taels left to my name, that would have emptied the kitchen. They'd need everyday clothes too. All they had were the rags on their backs. My women were going to eat full meals and were proper clothes. That much I swore. I gave them a long red cord to hold together, and we walked into the main room where third uncle and his wife sat waiting. Little Yurur stood up front as our ceremony master and called out the vows in his most serious voice. First bow, to heaven and earth. Second bow, to the elders. Third bow, husband and wives face each other. Then, off to the bridal chamber. Just like that, with a few bows and a strip of red cloth, I married 5 women in one night. I told my 5 brides to rest in the wedding room while I went back outside to drink with the boys. When they walked in and saw the bed, they must have been surprised. I'd built a huge platform bed out of mud bricks, big enough for 10 people. I'll admit, I'd been thinking ahead. While I was drinking outside, the women were getting to know each other. From what I learned later, Jinji finally came around. The others talked sense into her. Yin'er pointed out that I'd spent a fortune to save her from the constable, and asked what she thought would happen if she kept pushing me away. Would she rather be sold to a brothel or another family? Jinji admitted she'd been ungrateful and let go of her stubbornness. Yin'er and Shishir revealed they'd been singing girls at the governor's mansion back in Qinghe. Entertainers, not noble ladies. They put themselves below the 3 sisters in status, since Jinji came from a good family and was still untouched. Jinji was gracious about it and said they were all sisters now, all in the same boat, and should look after each other. They agreed that Jinji would be the head wife. Meanwhile, I spent the night drinking with Ernyo and the boys until I was half drunk. When I finally stumbled into the wedding room late at night, all 5 of them were sitting on the bed with their red veils still on. I poured 2 cups of wine and went to Jinji first. I lifted her veil with the cup and told her she was the oldest, so she'd be my first wife. She blushed and called me shameless, but she took the cup and drank the wedding toast with me. Then I lifted the veils of the other 4, one by one. For beautiful blushing faces stared back at me. I blew out the red candle, pushed Jinji down onto the bed, and kissed her before she could protest. In the darkness, I whispered that I'd treat her well. She closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks, and asked me to be gentle. I didn't wake up until late the next morning. Looking at the bed, I saw 3 spots of red on the sheets. All 3 sisters had been pure. Yin'er and Shishir, I'd already figured were experienced, given their background, and that didn't bother me. I sat on the edge of the bed feeling pretty proud of myself. 5 wedding nights in one, not bad at all. But then reality crept back in. This life of sharing a big warm bed with 5 beautiful wives would only last 1 month. After that, I'd have to report to the garrison. I shook my head, put on my shoes, and walked outside. When I walked out of the bedroom, Jinshu was sweeping the yard. I grabbed her by the waist and kissed her cheek. She turned red and wouldn't look at me. Before I could tease her more, Yin'er and Shishir came out of the kitchen carrying plates of food. I asked where Jinji and Jinhua were. Jinshu said they'd gone to the stream to wash clothes. I sent Jinshu to fetch them and told everyone we'd eat together like a real family. Shishir mentioned we were running low on food. I told them not to worry. I'd take them all to town later to buy grain and get each of them 2 sets of new clothes. My women weren't going to walk around in rags. Yin'er and Shishir lit up at that. While washing my face, I pulled up my system panel in my head. The wedding night had paid off nicely. 2 extra points in strength, 2 in stamina, and 1 in agility. And I discovered something even better. Every time I sleep with one of my wives, there's a chance to gain a random attribute point. So the stronger my love life, the stronger I actually become. Right now my stamina, strength, and speed are already several times that of a normal man. I could take on a dozen grown men by myself. Then village chief Zhao showed up at my gate with his son Zhao, saying he needed to register all my wives for the county records. I tried to just give him the names myself, but Zhao insisted the women had to come out in person. That pig was just looking for an excuse to stare at them. I told him to keep his eyes to himself, or I'd dig them out of his skull. The chief smacked his son and told him to shut up. Right then, Jinji and the twins came walking back from the stream. When Zhao saw Jinji's face, properly clean now, his jaw dropped and drool actually ran down his chin. The chief kicked him in the backside and cursed him for looking like he'd never seen a woman before. I stepped in front of the gate, arms crossed, blocking Zhao Da's view. Even old chief Zhao was shaken. He said Jinji looked like a fairy who'd stepped out of a painting. I called my 5 wives over and had them report their names and birthdays for the register. After they finished, the chief told me I was a lucky man. I smiled and said his new daughters-in-law were good too. Big hips, sure to give him a fat grandson. He winced at that. Turns out those 2 hefty women Zhao picked eat like pigs and were already draining the family's grain supply. As they left, Zhao kept sneaking looks back at my yard. The chief kicked him again and snapped at him. No matter how much he looked, those were still my wives, not his. After Zhao and his father left, little Yuer came running into my yard. He'd been squatting by the river nearby and overheard every word of their conversation. Turns out Zhao was already scheming. He figured once I left for the army, I'd probably die on the battlefield, and then he and his father could take my 5 wives for themselves. The old chief told him to wait and be patient, but didn't exactly say no. Zhao uncle works as a clerk at the county office, and he'd already pulled strings to keep Zhao from being drafted. They even talked about getting me sent to Anxi district, where the Chong barbarians had broken through the Western Pass. A death sentence, basically. I kept my face calm while the boys, Yuer, Ernyo, and Gowa, crouched in my yard waiting for my orders. Ernyo wanted to dress up as bandits and raid the Zhao house that very night. I shut that down. Zhao uncle has connections at the county office, and if anything happened to the chief and his son, investigators would come straight to us. With my current strength, I could handle a dozen constables, but a full squad of soldiers would finish me. I told Yuer to keep eyes on Zhao. The moment that bastard goes into the mountains, I want to know. I told Gowa to round up some guys and help me build a proper wall around my yard. If Zhao thinks he's going to peek over my fence, I'll make sure he loses something precious. After that, I told the boys I was taking my wives to town that afternoon. Ernyo said he needed grain, and Yuer's wife had been nagging him for new clothes, so they decided to come along with their wives too. When I told my 5 women we were going to the market, Jinji hesitated. She said 5 beautiful women walking together would draw too much attention and cause me trouble. I told her not to worry. I know the patrol captain in Greenstone Town, and besides, my fists aren't just for show. After last night, Jinji had changed. She'd become even more beautiful somehow. There was a warm, womanly glow about her now. She'd stopped thinking about the past and was fully looking out for me. I told all 5 of them I'd give each one a full tael of silver to spend however they wanted, clothes, shoes, whatever. I married them, so I'd make sure they were fed and dressed properly. They all bowed and thanked me. Yenner and Shurshur looked like they wanted to jump into my arms right there. That afternoon, we loaded up Ernyo's ox cart and headed to Greenstone Town. It's a small place, but it has everything. A grain shop, a butcher, a tailor, a fabric store, a shoe shop, even a rouge and powder shop. I went to buy grain with Ernyo and Yuer while the women went to the fabric store, guided by Ernyo's wife and Yuer's wife. The shop owner nearly tripped over himself running to the door when he saw 5 gorgeous women heading his way. A group like that meant a big sale. Even in plain hemp clothes, Jinji carried herself like royalty. The man could tell these weren't ordinary village women. At the fabric shop, Jinji picked out white cotton and gray hemp cloth, enough for 2 outfits each. She handled the haggling like someone who'd done it her whole life, calculating the cost, arranging tailoring, setting a pickup date. The twins chose matching fabrics. Then Jinshu pointed at her worn-out shoes with her toes poking through and said she needed new ones. Jinyue counted what was left of the silver I'd given them and said there was enough for 2 pairs of shoes each. Ernyo's wife and Yuer's wife were jealous. Yuer's wife grumbled that her husband only gave her 300 coins. Ernyo's wife said if her man had half my ability, she'd burn incense to the gods. Jinji smiled warmly and offered to buy both women a pair of shoes as thanks for showing them around. That made them light up instantly. My first wife already knew how to win people over. While the women were shopping, trouble was brewing. 5 drunk thugs at a tavern had spotted my wives walking past. Their leader was a big man with a bushy beard, and his crew included a bald guy, a short fat one, a tall brute, and a young punk with a scar on his face. They'd been harassing village women around town for a while, and now they'd set their eyes on mine. They figured from the plain clothes that these women belonged to some poor farmer who couldn't protect them. By the time the women finished buying shoes and reached the bridge at the west end of town, the 5 drunks had followed them there. The short fat one swaggered up and breathed his stinking booze breath in their faces. The bald one told my wives to spend the night with them if they wanted to get home in one piece. Jinshu tried to warn them that her husband was coming. They were right. I was already walking up behind the drunks with Ernyo and Yuer, leading the ox cart out of town. I'd seen these 5 tailing my women from a distance. I walked straight up to the Scarface punk blocking the bridge and told him plainly, "Move or die." He pulled a short knife from behind his back and twirled it around, trying to look tough. Ernyo cracked his knuckles and said we'd knock their teeth out. The tall one laughed and called us little boys. I told Ernyo and Yuer to take the wives and the cart across the bridge first. I'd handle this myself. But Scarface stepped in front of the cart, refusing to let anyone pass. That was enough. I shot forward and drove my fist straight into his gut. One hit. He doubled over like a shrimp, face turning purple, and crumpled to the ground. The bushy-beard gang couldn't believe their eyes when I dropped Scarface with one punch. Turns out he was actually the strongest of the 5. That shut them up fast. I told Ernyo to take my wives and go ahead. Jinji stopped on the bridge and called out for me to come with them. I flashed her a grin and kicked the short fat drunk so hard he flew 8 meters through the air. Little Yuer told the women not to worry. He'd seen me fight 1 against 8 before and win. The women couldn't believe it, though Jinji and the others quietly remembered how much stamina I'd shown on our wedding night. So maybe it wasn't so hard to believe after all. Ernyo said the real reason I wanted them gone was so I could fight without holding back. I didn't want my wives seeing what came next. That convinced them. They followed the ox cart toward the village. A moment later, a terrible scream echoed behind them, and all 5 women went pale. Along the way, Ernyo's wife and Yuer's wife told my wives how lucky they were. They said I was the most popular man in 10 villages, handsome, a great hunter, generous with money. They warned the girls to keep a close eye on me, because widows and unmarried girls were always circling. Back at the bridge, all 5 drunks were on the ground. I sat on a stone post and asked if they'd had enough. The leader begged for mercy with his dislocated arm. The tall one was on his knees with both arms broken. The bald one's nose was smashed flat, blood covering his face. Only Scarface stayed defiant, cursing at me. I asked who first got the idea to follow my women. Nobody answered. I picked up the short knife from the ground and started walking toward the leader. That broke them. The tall one blurted out it was the short, fat one's idea. I didn't waste words. I walked over to the fat one, and with one swing of the blade, I cut off his manhood. He screamed like a dying pig. I dropped the knife and told the rest that today I was only punishing the ringleader. Next time I caught any of them pulling this kind of thing, I'd do the same to all of them. I walked away into the sunset without looking back. Behind me, I could hear the fat one howling in agony while his friends stared at each other in shock. The tall one recognized my name, Wang Hu from Anil Village, and said no wonder I was so strong. The leader told them to keep their mouths shut about what happened. Even Scarface, tough as he acted, cursed the fat one and said he deserved it for starting trouble with village women before. Jinshu spotted me first, walking out of the darkness without a scratch. Yuer bragged to my wives that he'd told them so. Those drunks never stood a chance. Jinji rushed over and looked me up and down, checking for wounds. When she saw I was fine, the worry melted from her face. I took her hands and smiled. Of all 5 wives, Jinji is my favorite, the most beautiful and the smartest. That's exactly why I'd been tough on her at the start. Yinner asked what I'd done to the 5 men. I told them straight. The ringleader lost his manhood, and I broke the arms of the other 4. Sure worried about trouble with the law, but I told her not to worry. The local patrol captain is a fair man, and those thugs would get thrown in jail if this came to light. They'd keep their mouths shut. Besides, I'm about to leave for the army. No official would bother punishing me over a street fight. I walked home holding Jinji's hand on one side and Jinshu's on the other, the six of us striding ahead of the ox cart. Ernyo and Yuer stared at us with envy until their own wives yanked them by the ears and asked what they were looking at. At the gate, I unloaded 5 sacks of grain. I carried 200-pound bags at once on my shoulders like it was nothing, then went back and grabbed the last 3 in one trip, 2 on one shoulder, 1 tucked under my arm. Jinhua stared wide-eyed and said my strength was incredible. Yenner gave me a sultry look and suggested the girls should study my body more closely later. Jinhua blushed and said that was too embarrassing. Jinji and the sisters couldn't cook yet, so Yenner and Shirshir made a simple rice porridge with greens. They said they usually skip dinner, but I need a lot of food to keep up my energy. That night, I visited each wife again. When I finally came back to Jinji, she stroked my face in the moonlight and told me to pace myself. But I just gained 2 more attribute points, 1 strength, 1 stamina, bringing me to 20 and 21. 4 times stronger than a normal man. There was no way I could sleep after that. I pressed her down again, and we went another round until she was completely spent. I didn't wake up until almost noon. Outside, the yard was alive with activity. Gowa and his crew were building a proper brick wall around my property, and my 3 sisters-in-law had rolled up their sleeves to help, mixing mud, passing stones. On the other side of the yard, Yenner and Shirshir were cooking lunch, and the smell of meat drifted from the kitchen. Jinshu ran to the well to get me wash water, looking at me with pure admiration in her eyes. She said Gowa and the boys had been telling stories about me all morning, how I once strangled a 60-pound mountain wolf with 1 hand. I took the wet cloth she offered and scrubbed my face. Jinhua called me a braggart and said a tiger would be impossible to kill even with dozens of men. I told her to wait. One day I'd bring home a tiger and she'd see for herself. With my stats growing every day, killing a tiger wasn't out of the question. The only problem was finding one. In all my years hunting in the Green Bull Mountains, I'd never come across a tiger, though old villagers said they'd heard roaring deep in the mountains, about 30 miles in. At noon the heat was brutal. After everyone ate lunch and cooled off with some well-chilled watermelon, I sent Gowa's crew home to rest until the afternoon. Jinji came to me with something on her mind. She asked if she and the sisters could learn silkworm raising from Ernyo's wife. I said of course. Then she got to the real point. She was worried about money. I'd be leaving for the army soon, and we only had 5 sacks of grain. Autumn was coming, silkworms wouldn't survive the cold, and none of the women knew how to hunt or farm. How would they get through winter? I told her I'd buy more grain before I left, and make several hunting trips into the mountains to stock up. Then she asked who would be in charge of the household after I was gone. I understood what she was after. She wanted me to publicly name her as head wife so the others would follow her lead, and there'd be no squabbling. Smart woman. I announced that Jinji would handle all household decisions while I was away. Yenner and Shirshir agreed immediately. The twins had no objection either. She was their big sister. Jinhua mentioned that Zhaoda had been lurking around our gate again, staring at her chest. That sealed it. Time to deal with him. 5 days later, I got the chance. Yuer had been watching Zhaoda like I asked, and he reported that Zhaoda's group had gone into the mountains. I gathered Ernyo, Gowa, Yuer, and a few others. Ernyo was furious. He'd heard Zhaoda had pulled strings to avoid military service. If we all left for the army and Zhaoda stayed behind, he'd terrorize the whole village. I told everyone to stay calm. No killing. We're from the same village. We followed Zhao Da's group at a distance, 30 paces behind, staying hidden. Zhao Da's crew had a terrible day, just 3 rabbits and 2 pheasants. He was frustrated and decided to push past the 20-mile safety line deeper into the mountains where old villagers said tigers roamed. His men were scared, but he bullied them into following. I stopped and checked my system panel. After 5 days of hard work with my wives, my stats had jumped significantly. Strength was now 25, 5 times a normal man. Stamina 22. Agility 20. At this level, 1 punch from me carried 3,000 pounds of force, enough to kill an ox with a single blow. I honestly couldn't believe how fast I was growing. Marrying 5 wives turned out to be the best decision I ever made. The attribute points came so much easier this way than from hunting. If I'd known, I would have gotten married years ago. We followed Zhaoda deeper into the forest. The boys were nervous about tigers, but Ernyo said with me around, there was nothing to fear. I grinned. Honestly, I was hoping we'd run into one. With my current strength, I was ready. We pushed 30 miles deep into the Green Bull Mountains when a thunderous tiger roar shook the forest. Ernyo and the boys froze. I could tell from the sound it was still a few miles off, so I told them to fall back to the 20-mile safety line while I went ahead alone. If I couldn't handle a tiger, having them there would just get more people killed. I moved fast through the dense forest. A few hundred meters in, I heard screaming mixed with growling. Then 3 of Zhao Da's hunters came sprinting out of the trees, white as ghosts. I grabbed one and demanded to know what happened. He could barely talk, said the tiger had already killed several men, and it was chasing Zhao Da. I told them to run back and report to the village chief, then drew my short knife and gripped my trident and charged toward the roaring. I found the attack site first. For mangled bodies on the ground. Tang Xiaolong was still breathing, but barely. The tiger had torn him nearly in half, his insides spilling out. He begged me to save him, but there was nothing anyone could do. He died with his eyes wide open, full of fear. I closed his eyes and promised I'd avenge him. I kept moving and found Zhao Da backed against a huge tree, shaking head to toe, holding his hunting fork like it was a toy. The tiger was enormous, nearly 8 feet from head to tail, blood dripping from its jaws, golden eyes locked on Zhao Da like he was a meal. Zhao Da was screaming that his meat was too smelly to eat. The tiger lunged and clamped its jaws around both of Zhao Da's legs. That's when I made my move. I'd climbed a thick branch overhead and had my 8-stone composite bow drawn to full. I released the arrow and deliberately aimed for the tiger's hind leg instead of a kill shot. The pain made the beast clamp down harder, and it bit clean through both of Zhao Da's legs at the thigh. That was exactly what I wanted. With no legs, Zhao Da would be a cripple for life. He'd never be a threat to my wives or anyone else. And keeping him alive was more useful than letting him die. A dead village chief's son would bring investigation, but a crippled one saved by me would bring gratitude and debt. Zhao Da screamed as the tiger tried to run off with his severed legs. I snatched up my trident and hurled it with everything I had. It punched straight through the tiger's thick neck. The beast let out one last cry, stumbled a few steps, and crashed to the ground. Zhao Da looked at me with pure gratitude, thanked me, and passed out from blood loss. I bandaged his stumps to keep him alive, then walked over to the dying tiger. The trident had nearly gone clean through its neck. There was no saving it. I pulled the trident out. Blood gushed, and the tiger went still. Running into me, I said, was the worst luck you ever had. The tiger was heavy. I dragged its carcass back to where Zhao Da lay unconscious and made a simple stretcher from vines and branches, strapping his legless body to it. About 10 miles out, I ran into Yuer and village chief Zhao, who'd come looking for his son. I put on my best sorrowful face and said I'd arrived too late. The old chief burst into tears, thinking Zhao Da was dead. Then Zhao Da groaned from the stretcher, still alive. When the chief saw the stumps where his son's legs used to be, he broke down crying again. I told him to rush Zhao Da to the county doctor before he bled out. Zhao wiped his tears and said his family owed me. I told him Zhao Da and I may have had our differences, but we're from the same village. I'd never leave a man to die. The chief was deeply moved. I could tell he was ashamed of whatever schemes he and Zhao Da had been cooking up about my wives. After they left, I took the boys back to collect the tiger. When they saw the massive body, they couldn't believe it. Yuer said I'd be rich. A tiger's skin alone fetches 100 taels of silver, and the meat and bones would bring dozens more. I told them what I always say. As long as I eat meat, they'll have soup. That got them working fast. They tied the 400-pound beast to thick poles with vines and started hauling it out. I told them to go ahead, said I wanted to hunt a few rabbits and pheasants for my wives. But that was a lie. My real reason for staying behind was that I'd sensed someone hiding in the dense bushes nearby. Once the boys were gone, I called out for whoever was there to show themselves. A blade came flashing from the grass, aimed at my throat. I leaned back and blocked it with my short knife. Easy. The attacker was a teenage girl, maybe 16 or 17. A woman's voice shouted for the girl to stop. I got a good look at them. 2 females wearing Chong tribal clothing, leather boots, head wraps, and curved swords. The older one was pale and clearly wounded, blood soaking through her chest. She said she was Princess Nalan Chier of the Nalan tribe, one of the 4 great Chong clans, and begged me to save them. Before I could refuse, a squad of tribal soldiers crashed through the trees, warriors from the White Wolf tribe, hunting the princess. Their commanders surrounded the 3 of us with over a dozen men. The princess told them to let me go. I had nothing to do with this. The commander laughed. and said they'd take the 2 women and kill me on the spot. In their eyes, people from Great Qian were just sheep to be slaughtered. You want to catch people? Fine, I said. But why kill me? They laughed harder. The commander said Qian people were livestock to them. Kill whenever they pleased. Well then, I said, I'll just have to kill all of you instead. Before he could blink, I drove my trident straight through the nearest soldier's chest. The tribal commander screamed for his men to kill me. A dozen soldiers rushed at me all at once. I laughed and yanked my trident free, then hurled it so hard it pinned a man to a tree trunk. The girl Meng Yin stared in shock. She realized if I hadn't held back earlier, she'd already be dead. I drew my short knife and went to work. My speed was like lightning. I cut through them one after another. 2 here, 3 there. Princess Nalan told Meng Yin to stop guarding her and help me instead. The girl charged in with her curved sword. Within minutes, only 3 enemies were left standing, including the commander. He was shaking. All his arrogance was gone. I killed the last 2 soldiers, then walked up to him with my dripping blade and smiled. He screamed something about killing me and charged. I sidestepped, slashed his throat in one clean motion, and watched him fall. Nalan Shear thanked me for saving them. I asked where they'd entered the mountains and whether more soldiers were coming. She said they'd fled from the grasslands and there were no more pursuers. The tribal army wouldn't cross 1,000 miles of mountain range. Good enough. I told them they were free to go, then crouched down to search the dead commander's body for valuables. All I found was a pink undergarment. I tossed it away in disgust. That's when the princess pulled out a gold disc the size of a child's palm and offered it to me if I'd guide them out of the mountains. I stared at it, briefly considering whether to just grab it and run. She sweetened the deal, said if I saved her, the Nalan tribe would remember me forever, and once she returned to the grasslands, she'd send me 10,000 in gold. I took the disc. It weighed at least 10 taels, a small fortune. Between the tiger and this gold, I'd struck it rich in a single day. By evening, I'd led them to the edge of the mountains. I told them to hide while I fetched some local women's clothes so they could blend in. Meng Yin was worried about the princess's chest wound, but Cheer said she could hold on one more night. I promised to take them to town for treatment in the morning, then hurried down to my house. Yuter spotted me first and shouted. Jinhua and Jinshu ran straight into my arms. I held up 2 wild chickens I'd caught on the way back, and the girls nearly cried with happiness. Yinner and Shishir were waiting by the gate with warm smiles, and I promised to take everyone to town again tomorrow. Jinji came out last, pretending to be angry. She said if something had happened to me, the 5 of them wouldn't know how to survive. I pulled her into my arms and buried my nose in her hair. She scolded me for doing it in front of everyone, but I could tell she wasn't really mad. Then I secretly slipped the gold disc into her hand. Her eyes went wide, but she tucked it into her sleeve without a word. I whispered that I needed 2 sets of women's clothes and for her to come with me up the hill. I'd explain tonight. She didn't ask questions. That's what I love about Jinji. The longer we're together, the more I see how different she is. She trusts me completely. In the yard, the tiger's carcass was still lying where the boys had left it. You were asked what to do with it. I told them we'd haul it to town tomorrow and sell it. The money would be split among everyone who helped. The boys cheered at that. After the boys left that night, I carried Jinji up the hill to where the 2 Chong women were hiding. We brought them back to my yard. Yinner saw me walk in with an unconscious woman on my back and a wary girl with a curved sword, and asked who they were. I told her I'd found them in the mountains and to lock the gate. Jinji laid Nalan Cheer on the bed and started undressing her wound. The twins fetched warm water. I sent Yinner and Shishir outside to watch for anyone approaching. Meng Yin dropped to one knee begging me to save her princess. I told her to get up. The princess would live. I told everyone to stop calling her princess and just use the name Lan Cheer. I trusted my wives completely and didn't hide her identity. But when Jinji was about to remove Cheer's bloody undergarments, she politely told me to leave the room. I took one last look at Cheer's beautiful face and reluctantly walked out. In the yard, Yinner teased me for getting kicked out. I grabbed her, sat down in my bamboo chair with her on my lap, and gave her backside 2 playful smacks. She blushed and called me husband in that bewitching voice of hers. I carried her straight to the west room for the night. Next morning, I had the boys prepare 3 ox carts, one for the tiger carcass, one for the injured Cheer lying on bedding, and one for supplies. Ernyo asked who the 2 new women were. I told him I'd pick them up in the mountains as servants for my wives. He just shook his head in admiration and said only I could afford household maids in Anil village. We headed for Greenstone town. When we reached the bridge, a huge crowd was already waiting. Word had spread overnight. The village chief had rushed through town yesterday with his legless son on a cart, and the story of my tiger kill had reached every village within 10 miles. People swarmed around the cart to see the massive carcass. They couldn't believe one man had done it alone. They talked about how another village once lost a dozen men killing a single tiger, and here I'd done it by myself. Women in the crowd threw me flirtatious looks, calling me the tiger-slaying hero and the greatest hunter in Qingping County. One woman loudly wondered if I'd consider a sixth wife. My 5 wives walked behind the carts wearing white veils. Jinshu marveled at how popular I was. Jinyue lifted her chin proudly, enjoying the jealous stares from other women. Shishir said marrying me was the luck of 3 lifetimes. Yenner said she'd choose this simple life with me over all the luxury she'd known before. Jinji said nothing. She just watched my back with eyes full of deepening affection. As we reached the center of town, constables pushed through the crowd. Patrol Captain Wang was coming to meet us. When I saw Patrol Captain Wang Zhong approaching, I stepped forward and bowed respectfully. He surprised me by saying he'd known my father Wang Shan, and that we should consider ourselves uncle and nephew. I jumped at that. Having a connection to a local official, even a low-ranking one, was worth more than silver. He was happy too. Having a nephew famous for killing a tiger would boost his own reputation in the county. I asked if he could help me sell the tiger. He said to trust him, and he'd have the money by evening. I handed over the cart without hesitation. Jinji quietly asked if I was worried about being cheated. I told her no. The whole town had seen me bring the tiger in, and he wouldn't risk his name over it. Besides, we were family now. I sent Ernyo and Dashin to the grain shop, then took Ewer and the women to the south end of town where the doctor's clinic was. I carried Cheer inside. The old doctor took one look at her festering arrow wound and said we'd gotten her there just in time. Half a day later, and she'd have been beyond saving. He needed 7 days to treat her. Meng Yin stayed behind to watch over her. Walking out of the clinic, I admitted to Jinji that I was nervous about hiding a Chong princess in our area. She read my mind instantly and reminded me of what Cheer herself had said. The tribal army couldn't cross 1,000 miles of mountain range, and the Green Bull Mountains had countless exits. Nobody would trace her to our little village. She was right. I kissed her on the cheek right there in the street. She stomped her foot, but couldn't stay mad. I told my wives we were doing a big shopping trip. Winter blankets, warm clothes, plenty of pork. They cheered. That evening, Uncle Wang came back from the county capital with a heavy bag. 200 taels of official silver. I couldn't believe it. He explained that some rich man named Lu was celebrating his 60th birthday and paid top price for the whole tiger. I immediately offered to split it half and half. He refused, pretending to be offended. So I compromised. 20 taels for him, 10 taels each for his 4 constables. He tried to push back, but I told him if he wouldn't take even that small amount, I'd refuse all 200. He finally pocketed the 30 taels and told his men to thank me. They bowed gratefully. 10 taels was a full year's salary for them. After Uncle Wang left, I had 130 taels remaining. Combined with the gold disc from the princess, I'd gone from nearly broke to the richest man in Anil village in 2 days. I handed out 15 taels of silver to each of the boys. Ernyo, Ewer, Gowa, Dashin, and one more. That was enough for any of their families to live on for a full year. They were over the moon. Ernyo said he could finally stand tall at home. Ewer bit the silver to make sure it was real. Gowa almost cried. His family is the poorest of the group. His father is disabled and his mother is bedridden. They survive on handouts from the rest of us. After everyone left, I pulled Gowa aside and tried to give him an extra 10 taels. He refused, saying I'd already done too much. I had to threaten him and physically stuff the silver into his hands, then shoved 5 pounds of pork into his arms and kicked him out the gate before he could argue anymore. Jinshu watched the whole thing and called me a good man. I told her to shut up about that. I locked the gate and looked at my 5 wives with hopeful eyes. Tonight the 2 Chong light bulbs weren't around, so maybe we could all share the big bed again. Jinji blushed and said absolutely not. Tonight I'd sleep alone in the West Room. Then Jinshu and Jinwei sheepishly admitted they'd both started their monthly cycles. I looked at Yenner and Shishir with desperate eyes. They giggled and said they were fine. So those 2 kept me company that night. Half a month flew by. One morning after breakfast, I was about to head to town to check on Cheer's recovery when Ernyo came running to my gate, sweating and panting. Officials had come to the village again, not to hand out wives this time, to order us to the county military camp. Tomorrow, They'd cut the 1-month deadline in half without warning. Ernyo had asked why and gotten slapped across the face for it. I went to the village square. A horse-faced constable was reading names from a roster and shouting that anyone who'd received a wife must report to the county barracks by tomorrow morning. No exceptions. Anyone who didn't show up would be executed as a deserter. A man in his 30s protested, said he hadn't even gotten his wife pregnant yet. The constable told him to shut up or be treated as a deserter. Ewer and the boys gathered around me, faces grim. I told them to stay calm. I'd be right there with them. Then I walked up and asked the constable what we needed to bring. He said just a little silver for food along the way. If we made it as combat soldiers, we'd receive weapons and uniforms. If we only qualified as support troops, we'd have to bring our own weapons, bedding, and money, because support soldiers were treated like slaves, barely fed, barely clothed. The villagers murmured among themselves. Some said combat soldiers at least got equipment and decent food, but could die on the front lines. Support troops had better survival odds, but lived like dogs. Others said it all depended on where you got stationed. If they sent you to the front, nothing mattered. I listened to it all quietly. The day I'd been dreading had finally arrived. After the constables left, I told the dozen or so young men who'd stayed behind to go home, say goodbye to their families, and meet at the village gate at dawn. Ewer asked if I wanted to be a combat soldier or support. Ernyo declared I'd obviously be a combat soldier, said with my skills, I'd make general someday. Gowa simply said whatever I chose, he'd choose the same. I walked home alone. The women didn't know yet. When Yenner saw me back so soon, I told her to fetch all 5 wives immediately. They came running from the stream, carrying laundry baskets. Jinji stood behind my chair and rubbed my temples. I told them straight. I was leaving for the county barracks tomorrow morning. The room went quiet. Jinji's face changed. In just half a month, we'd built something real together, and now it was being ripped away. I'd hoped for another 2 weeks to deepen things, maybe get someone pregnant, and keep earning attribute points. All of that was gone now. I told them what they needed to hear. The grain and winter supplies were ready. If word ever came that I'd died in battle, they were free to leave and remarry. Jinji squeezed my hands and said they'd wait for me to come home. Shurshur started crying and said if I died, she wouldn't go on living either. Yenner quickly shut that down, said I'd come back as a general and make them all officers' wives. Jinhua puffed up her little face and agreed. I asked them to cook a proper farewell dinner. Then I pulled all 5 into my arms at once. Yenner reminded me about Cheer. I said her wound would take 2 or 3 months to heal. After that, she could stay or go as she pleased. I had bigger things to worry about now. In a real battle with thousands of soldiers clashing, personal strength only goes so far. Surviving the army would take more than just muscle. That night, we had our last meal together, and then all 6 of us shared the big bed one final time. Every one of my wives gave herself to me completely. Even Jinji dropped all her usual restraint and came to me on her own. By morning, I'd gained 2 more attribute points. My strength was now 29, nearly 6 times a normal man. Stamina 25, agility 22. A true superhuman body. Only my intelligence and luck lagged behind. Luck especially, still just 2 points. I had no idea what it was even for. I crept out of bed before dawn. 5 pairs of long white legs were tangled across the sheets, all of them still deep asleep, exhausted. I stood at the door and took one last look. Goodbye, my wives. They were all awake, I found out later. Jinshu clung to Jinji's neck and whispered that I was really gone. Jinji, still flushed from the night before, said quietly that I'd come back. Yenner stared at the ceiling wondering when that would be. At the village gate, the boys were already gathered under the willow tree. Ernyo grinned when he saw me coming with my pack and short knife. I didn't waste time on speeches. I waved my hand and said one word, move. 15 of us, the strongest young men in Anil village, marched toward Qingping County. 30 miles on foot took us about 4 hours. When we reached the western gate, dozens of soldiers and constables were directing traffic. A soldier shouted that anyone reporting for military duty should line up outside the wall to sign in. We wouldn't even be entering the city. At the gate, a soldier checked us in. The line moved fast. Write your name or stamp a thumbprint. When I picked up the brush and wrote mine, 2 officials walked up to the registration table. The clerk jumped to his feet. One of them, a pale, well-groomed man in an official's uniform, stared at my name and asked if I was the tiger-slaying hero from Anil village. I said yes. Then he introduced himself, Zhao Xian, the county deputy magistrate. and village chief Zhao Tian's younger brother, Zhao Da's uncle. I nearly choked. Last I'd heard, this man was just a lowly clerk. Now he was the second highest official in Qingping County. Turns out my tiger kill had helped him too. When the county magistrate learned the famous tiger slayer came from the same village as his clerk, he'd promoted Zhao Xian on the spot. I was apparently the Zhao family's lucky star. He was friendly, told me to call him Uncle Zhao, thanked me for saving Zhao Da's life. I put on my most sincere face and said Zhao Da and I were like brothers. Of course I'd save him. Behind me, Ernyo and Yuer were biting their lips, trying not to laugh. The county military captain, Li Xiong, was standing right there too. He looked me up and down with admiration and said a young man who could kill a tiger alone had a limitless future in the army. Zhao Xian quietly asked Li Xiong to look after our village boys. Li Xiong nodded and said it was as good as done. The young clerk at the desk, Li Zian, was also impressed. He told me to rest in the shade and wait for the escort to the camp. Before we left, I overheard him warning the squad leader, a stocky man named Chen Feng, that Chang cavalry had already raided into our Nan'an district, and Anxi district to the west was being torn apart. Things were worse than I'd thought. Chen Feng ordered us into 4 columns. His second-in-command, a dark-faced soldier named Chen Ergu, kicked anyone who didn't line up straight. We marched about 5 miles northeast to a military camp with its gates wide open. It was already dark when we arrived. Chen Feng decided weapons would be issued tomorrow and told us to sleep on the training field, a huge open patch of weedy ground. One big recruit complained about sleeping in the dirt. Chen Ergu gave him a look that shut him up fast. He warned us that anyone caught leaving camp would be executed as a deserter, then made us shout our understanding twice before he was satisfied. After the soldiers left, we all sat down on the ground. Yuer unwrapped his bundle and pulled out a few yellow corn cakes. Ernyo had some dark steamed buns and 2 lumps of pickled vegetables. That was dinner. Cold food on bare ground, under the stars, on our first night as soldiers. That first night on the training field was miserable. By mid-September the nights had turned cold, and half the men woke up shivering and sneezing. At dawn, Chen Erga banged a copper gong until everyone was on their feet. Breakfast was a bowl of thin rice porridge, 2 rough grain buns, and a few slices of pickled vegetables. Nobody complained. For village men, any food was good food. After eating, we lined up on the field and waited. Then County Captain Li Xiong arrived with his squad leaders. No speeches, no pleasantries. He told us to pick a side. Combat soldiers on the left, support troops on the right. Yuer and the boys all looked at me. I walked left without hesitating. Every one of my brothers followed. Yuer, Ernyo, Gowa, Dashin, 8 or 9 of us total. Only 4 or 5 older men from our village chose support duty. Combat soldiers each got a proper spear and a military uniform. Support troops got a cheap long pike and a hemp shirt. The difference in quality was obvious. Then Li Xiong dropped the real news. After 3 days of training here, we wouldn't be going to Nan'an district as everyone expected. We were being sent to Anxi district, the western front, where Chang cavalry had already smashed through the mountain pass and were rampaging across the countryside. The field erupted. Men shouted that this was a death sentence. Nobody here had real training. The Chang horsemen were fierce warriors, and with the western pass fallen, there was nothing to hide behind. Li Xiong's face went dark. He roared for silence. You think the court gave you grain, silver, and women for free? If you don't want to die, train hard for the next 3 days. You won't be thrown straight into battle. I'll send you by a safe route to the district capital, where you'll keep training until you're ready to fight. That calmed things down a little. He put squad leader Chen Feng in charge of our training and left. Chen Feng immediately dumped the work on Chen Ergu and walked off with the other squad leaders. For 3 days, Ergu drilled us from morning to dusk, forming circular defensive formations, square attack formations, basic spear work. By the 3rd morning, when Li Xiong came back to inspect, nearly 400 of us could move in organized blocks. He seemed satisfied. Chen Feng stood at attention and reported. 386 recruits, all present. Li Xiong ordered him to march us to Anxi district capital within 7 days. Erga bellowed for everyone to grab their packs and assemble at the camp gate. The men shouted back in unison. We actually sounded like soldiers for the first time. As the crowd broke up, Chen Feng called my name and told me to stay behind. After the others left, Chen Feng pulled me aside and asked quietly if I wanted to stay behind in the county. He said he and Captain Li could arrange it. I wouldn't have to go to Anxi. I looked at Ernyo and the boys walking toward the gate, their packs on their backs, and told him no. I was going to Anchi. He warned me it was chaos out there, Chong horsemen raiding everywhere. I told him my mind was made up. He slapped my shoulder and said I had real courage. You were asked what that was about. I told him the squad leader just wanted me to keep you idiots in line on the march. You were grumbled that we weren't deserters. At the camp gate, Deputy Magistrate Zhao Xian reminded Chen Feng to watch over his village nephews. Captain Li Xiong looked grim. After we marched away, I later heard. The two officials talked about how desperate things had become. Qingping County had only 30,000 households left, and less than 20% of the men were still available. The governor was only sending a few thousand raw recruits to Anxi, as if he'd already written the district off. Li Xiong suspected the governor was hoarding the professional border army and refusing to fight the Chong head-on. 6 days of hard marching brought us to Anxi district capital. The sight took my breath away. The city walls were built entirely of stone and brick, standing over 60 feet tall, a true fortress, nothing like the low walls of Qingping County. But all 4 gates were sealed shut. The roads around the city were empty. The walls bristled with weapons and soldiers staring down at us. Chen Feng told us to head for the east gate. His orders said that was the only way in. We ran along the base of the wall under the watchful eyes of the garrison above. Then, about 300 meters from the east gate, Chong cavalry appeared. Several dozen horsemen burst from a tree line to the north, charging straight at us. They had severed human heads dangling from ropes on their saddles. Chen Feng cursed and shouted for everyone to raise spears and form a circular formation. He said we were lucky it was only a few dozen riders. A larger force would have wiped us out on the spot. But even a small Chong cavalry unit was terrifying. One horseman could handle 3 to 5 of our men easily, and his 50 veteran soldiers had never actually seen real combat either. He grabbed a heavy shield and a long spear and planted himself at the front of the formation, facing the charging cavalry head-on. Behind me, Ewer whimpered that he was scared. Ernyo gripped his spear and tried to sound tough, but he couldn't even look the riders in the eye. I watched the horsemen close in, curved swords flashing in the sunlight, hooves shaking the earth, and told everyone to hold steady. If we survived the first charge, we could fight back. I wasn't afraid. I'd already killed over a dozen Chong soldiers with my own hands in the mountains. Horseback made them more intimidating, sure, but they still had 1 head each, same as me. Chen Feng let out a thunderous war cry as the riders bore down on us. The Chong centurion led the charge himself, screaming to kill every last one of us. He smashed into our spear circle at full gallop, his curved sword hacking left and right, cutting down several men instantly. His riders followed right behind, horses slamming into bodies, spears snapping like twigs, blood spraying everywhere. Some of the horsemen were knocked off their mounts too, but the damage to our side was devastating. Chen Feng killed 1 rider with his spear and screamed for everyone to close ranks and keep the cavalry trapped inside our circle. The centurion didn't care about being surrounded. He could see we were all green recruits and started rallying his men to punch through and come back for a second charge. Chen Feng knew if they broke free, it would turn into a one-sided slaughter. Chen Ergu threw himself at the centurion with his spear. The centurion yanked his horse's reins. The beast reared up, and with 1 swing of his sword, he snapped Ergu's spear in half. The horse came crashing down toward Ergu as the centurion raised his blade for the killing blow, grinning like a demon. That's when I moved. I launched off the ground, flew through the air, and drove my spear straight through the centurion's chest. The tip punched clean through him. He looked down at it in disbelief, then toppled off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. Ergu stared at me, shaking, and stammered his thanks. I told him to save it. We still had 40-some riders to deal with. But killing their leader had broken them. Without the centurion, the cavalry panicked. 1 rider screamed that the commander was dead and tried to flee. Chen Feng seized the moment and roared that anyone who killed a Chong rider would earn 5 taels of silver. 3 kills earned the rank of corporal, 6 kills made you a sergeant. That got the blood pumping. I led Ernyo and the boys on a hunt through the chaos, picking riders off their horses 1 by 1 with my spear. The screaming was constant, on both sides. When it was over, more than 30 Chong bodies littered the ground. Only about a dozen riders escaped, but we'd lost 70 or 80 men ourselves, killed or badly wounded. It was brutal. Chen Feng ordered us to grab the wounded, cut off the enemy heads as proof, and run for the city gate. He was afraid reinforcements would come. A young officer on the wall challenged us. Chen Feng shouted our identification, Nan'an District, Qingping County, and gave the password. The gates swung open, and we poured inside. Minutes after the last man crossed the threshold, the earth began to shake. Thousands of Chang cavalry came flooding across the northern plain toward the east gate like a black tide. Ergu bent over gasping and said if we'd been even a little slower, we'd all be dead outside those walls. Chen Feng looked at me and said the whole thing had turned on my one-spear thrust. Without it, 9 out of 10 of us would have died. I told him it was everyone's effort. The young officer came down from the wall and introduced himself. He'd watched the entire fight from above and was impressed. He hadn't expected a few hundred raw recruits to not only survive a cavalry charge, but kill most of the attackers. He told Chen Feng to bring us to the north camp, where the district governor would assign us once reinforcements from other counties arrived. His tone was respectful, a courtesy we'd earned with blood. Inside the city, the streets were packed with refugees. Makeshift tents lined every wall, filled with women and children staring blankly at nothing. Ergu cursed the Chang riders. Ernyo swore we'd drive every last one of them out of Liang province. The young officer, whose name turned out to be Lu Zhengbei, walked beside me and asked my name. I told him. He smiled and said the name suited me. Fierce as a tiger indeed. Then he suddenly stopped. Up ahead, a burly officer named Zhou Meng was harassing a woman in a white dress and veil who'd set up a porridge stand to feed refugees. Zhou Meng claimed the city commander had just issued an order banning private relief efforts and ordered his soldiers to smash the stand and chase the refugees away. The woman, Lu Jingbei's younger sister, Lu Rushua, said she'd never heard of such an order. That's when I realized the young officer who'd led us through the gate was actually her brother. Lu Zhengbei stepped forward and confronted Zhou Meng, calling the order a lie. Zhou Meng sneered. His uncle was the district military commander, the highest authority in Anxi. He didn't bother hiding that the real reason was his obsession with Lu Rushua. He'd wanted her for a long time and was using this as an excuse. When Zhengbei refused to hand over his sister, Zhou Meng ordered his dozen soldiers to attack. The two groups clashed. Zhengbei fought hard, but Zhou Meng was stronger, a 4th-rank blood chi martial artist against Zhengbei's 3rd-rank bone forging level. One devastating punch sent Zhengbei crashing to the ground, coughing blood, his internal organs damaged. He couldn't get back up. Zhou Meng gloated and walked toward Rushua, saying once he'd had his way with her, the Lu family would have no choice but to agree to a marriage. She backed away, terrified, telling him he had no right. He reached for her veil, saying he wanted to see if the #1 beauty of Anxi lived up to her reputation. She stumbled backward over a bench. I was already moving. I caught her before she hit the ground, one arm around her waist. She opened her eyes and found my face inches from hers. Her cheeks flushed red, and she couldn't look me in the eye. She thanked me quietly. Zhou Meng was furious, demanded to know where this mud-legged peasant had come from. Chen Feng stepped in carefully, bowing and explaining we were new recruits from Qingping County. He tried to stay neutral. Both Zhou Meng and Zhengbei were captains commanding 1,000 men each, far above our rank. Zhou Meng told us to get lost, but I was still holding Rushua, and I couldn't keep my mouth shut. "Sir," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "snatching a woman in broad daylight doesn't seem very appropriate, does it?" Zhou Meng glared at me like he wanted to eat me alive. Asked who I thought I was. I told him calmly that I was just a new recruit who happened to kill a Chang centurion. He laughed in my face, said there was no way a green soldier could take down a battle-hardened cavalry officer. I corrected him. Not just the centurion, 13 other riders too. Just now, outside the east gate. He turned to Zhengbei and demanded to know if it was true. Zhengbei smirked through his bloody lip and said that's exactly why he'd left his post to personally escort us to camp. Zhou Meng still didn't believe it, so Chen Feng signaled our men to bring forward the proof. 34 severed Chang heads, one by one. That changed everything. The refugees lining the street erupted. People screamed with joy, wept for their dead parents, and shouted that we were heroes. Some young men declared they wanted to enlist on the spot. The crowd surged toward us. Zhou Meng saw the mob forming and knew if he pushed further, he'd spark a riot. He snarled at Zhengbei that he'd gotten lucky today, then stormed off with his men. That's when I realized I was still holding Rushua's waist. She asked me, very quietly, if I could let go now. I apologized and released her, though honestly I wasn't sorry at all. Zheng Bei thanked me formally for saving his sister. He promised to report the battle to the district governor himself and make sure we all received proper credit. Then he handed his command token to a guard named Lu Eru and told him to lead us to the north camp while he took Rushua home. Before leaving, Rushua stole one last glance at me. I watched them go until Chun Feng elbowed me and told me to stop staring. At the north camp, the gate guards didn't believe us at first, but when they saw the heads in Aaron Yo's and Yuer's hands, their jaws dropped. They waved us through. Within an hour, the whole camp knew what we'd done. Thousands of soldiers, new and veteran, crowded the training field to stare at the pile of 34 heads. The gossip was intense. Apparently, another group of 500 recruits had arrived the day before and been hit by a similar-sized Chong patrol. They'd lost more than half their men and fewer than 200 made it inside the walls. Compared to them, our performance was almost unbelievable. The deputy camp commander, Zheng Yuanshan, came rushing over. He stared at the heads, asked Chen Feng if it was really true, and when Chen Feng confirmed it, he said, "Good," 3 times in a row. He ordered a full battle report written up immediately. Chen Feng admitted he couldn't write. Zheng laughed and said he just needed to dictate. There were scribes in camp. He promised the report would reach the district governor and the camp commander by tonight, and told us to wait for our rewards. We stood at attention on that training field, 300 of us, back straight, filthy and bloodied, while every soldier in the camp looked at us with respect. It felt good. 34 heads at 5 taels each, 170 taels of silver. But more than the money, we'd proven something. We weren't just village farmers anymore. That night around the campfire, Chun Feng gave us the grim numbers. We'd killed over 30 Chong riders, but we'd lost 13 veteran soldiers and 39 recruits. Another dozen or so were badly wounded. Gowa sat there with a bandaged shoulder, pale-faced. Ergu laid his sword across his knees and admitted the Chong cavalry were truly fearsome. I summed it up simply. Infantry against cavalry is always a disadvantage, and we were all green. The fact that we won it all was remarkable. Chen Feng said that by imperial military standards, killing a Chong centurion earned 100 taels of silver and promotion to squad leader, 8th rank. He told me the position was mine. Next morning, the entire camp assembled on the training field. The district governor, Qin Weining, arrived alongside the garrison commander, Zhou Shang. The governor called for Chen Feng and me to step forward. He looked me over and asked if I was the one who'd killed the White Wolf centurion with a single spear thrust. I confirmed it. He nodded with satisfaction and announced the reward, 100 taels and the rank of squad leader. Then Zhou Mang stepped out of formation and objected. He said he didn't believe a raw recruit could kill a 3rd-rank warrior. He demanded proof. Zheng Bei immediately spoke up, swearing he'd witnessed it from the wall. But Commander Zhou Shang, Zhou Mang's uncle, smoothly suggested that Zheng Bei might have been mistaken in the chaos. He proposed a simple test. Let me fight Zhou Mang. If I could beat him, my claim would be proven. Zheng Bei pulled me aside and warned me not to accept. Zhou Mang was a 4th-rank blood chi martial artist, stronger than the centurion I'd killed. He said I had no chance. I thanked him for the warning, then turned to the governor and said I accepted the challenge. Zhou Mang laughed and said if I could survive 10 of his strikes, he'd admit I won. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I'd beat him in 3. He drew his long saber and charged, slashing at my neck. Too slow. I sidestepped and appeared 2 meters behind him. He spun and swung at my waist. Still too slow. I stepped back easily. The crowd started counting. 2 strikes. Both missed completely. Zhou Mang was getting desperate. He screamed at me to stop running and fight like a man. I smiled and said fine. I stomped the ground, launched myself into the air, and swung my spear like a massive hammer straight down at his head. He raised his saber to block. Metal crashed against metal with a sound that rang across the entire field. The impact was so violent, it drove Zhou Mang stumbling backward over a dozen steps. Thousands of soldiers watched in stunned silence. Zhou Mang's hands were shaking. He could barely hold his saber. He stared at me and said I must be a 5th-rank blood ignition martial artist. I had no idea what he was talking about. He noticed I had no chi energy fluctuations and asked if I was born with supernatural strength. I latched onto that explanation immediately. Tan Sheng Sun League, natural-born power. A perfect cover for my system. He demanded to know why I was also so fast. I shrugged and said I'd spent years racing wolves and leopards through the mountains. When Yuer shouted from the crowd that I was the tiger-slaying hero of Qingping County, Zhou Mang's expression shifted. Hunters were prized in the Liang province military, strong, sharp-eyed, tough. That explained a lot to him, but his pride wouldn't let it go. He roared and launched at me like a cannonball, stabbing his blade toward my chest. I swept my spear sideways, knocked his sword clean out of his hands, then kicked him square in the chest. He flew backward over 10 meters and crashed into the dirt. Before he could get up, I was already standing over him with my spear tip 3 inches from his throat. He gritted his teeth and admitted I'd won. The whole field exploded, thousands of soldiers cheering, shouting that they'd never seen a recruit defeat a captain before. I turned to walk up the platform and claim my reward. Then behind me, die. Pure instinct. I spun and thrust my spear backward without thinking. The blade sank 3 inches into Zhou Meng's chest. When I looked, I realized he'd charged at me barehanded. He'd done it on purpose, let himself get stabbed so his uncle could accuse me of attempted murder. Commander Zhou Shang erupted, calling me a criminal and ordering his guards to arrest me. Governor Qin stopped them and said it was clearly self-defense. Zhou Meng was carried away smiling through bloody teeth, whispering that my reward was finished. I understood his game now. He'd sacrificed his own flesh to set a trap. I memorized his face and swore to myself, someday I'd kill him for real. Zhou Shang pushed hard, arguing that Zhou Meng had been unarmed and I'd struck a lethal blow deliberately. Zheng Bei defended me, and Chen Feng led all 300 of our men to kneel and vouch for me. Governor Qin told Zhou Shang quietly not to break the soldiers' morale over this. Zhou Shang backed off. He'd already gotten what he wanted. The governor announced the compromise. My merits and offense canceled each other out. Instead of squad leader, I'd be demoted to sergeant, a lower rank. But I'd still get the 100 taels of silver. He asked if I accepted. I bowed and said I did. There was nothing else to say. After the ceremony, Zhou Shang made his next move. He recommended sending Zheng Bei with 1,500 soldiers to reinforce Copper Mountain Fort, a real assignment, but also a way to remove Zheng Bei from the city and away from his sister. Then he suggested our 300 Qingping soldiers be sent to Ningxia Fort to fill their manpower gap. Governor Qin hesitated. We were all raw recruits, but Zhou Shang argued we'd proven ourselves outside the walls, and Ningxia Fort was built on a mountain, easy to defend. A good place to temper new soldiers. The governor agreed. Just like that, we were being shipped to the frontier. Zhou Shang formally issued the orders. In 3 days, Chen Feng and I would lead our 300 Qingping soldiers to reinforce Ningxia Fort. Zheng Bei would take 1,500 men to Copper Mountain Fort. We'd barely set foot in the city and were already being thrown out. Obviously, Zhou Shang wanted us gone and wanted Zheng Bei separated from his sister. But we had no power to argue. Chen Feng and I bowed and accepted. After the officials left, Zheng Bei came over looking guilty. He said it was his fault we'd been dragged into this. Chen Feng asked what Ningxia Fort actually was. Zheng Bei explained it was a military outpost built on a mountain about 30 miles south of the fallen West Mountain Pass. It used to be a major iron mining site with a 1,000-man garrison, but production had dropped and it was downgraded to just 200 soldiers. He suspected it had already been hit by Chang raiders. Otherwise, Zhou Shang wouldn't be sending 300 raw recruits to reinforce it. Chen Feng asked how we'd get there with Chang cavalry roaming everywhere. Zheng Bei and I answered at the same time, travel by night, hide by day. Zheng Bei said his father wanted to meet me and invited me to his home that evening. I agreed. After he left, Ewer complained that we should have fought harder for my squad leader rank. I told him we were nobodies here. Getting a sergeant position and 100 taels was already more than we deserved from people who wanted us dead. Chen Feng agreed and said even the governor had to give Commander Zhou face. Erga pointed out we were barely trained and being sent to some remote fort. It was basically a death sentence. I shook my head and said leaving the city was actually better. At least at Ningxia Fort, we wouldn't have to worry about getting stabbed in the back by Zhou Shang's people. That changed the mood. Gowa said he'd follow me anywhere. Ernyo shouted he'd walk through fire if I led the way. Chen Feng told everyone that from now on, my orders carried the same weight as his. Then I did something that surprised them all. I handed Chen Feng my entire 100 taels, every coin, and told him to distribute it to the families of our dead brothers and to the badly wounded. I didn't keep a single piece. Chen Feng stared at me. Ewer hesitated, then threw his 5 taels onto the pile. Ergu added his 10. One by one, every soldier who'd earned reward money that day gave it all up. They said if they followed me, they'd earn 10 times, 100 times, more in the future. I promised them I would. Feng promised we'd share everything from now on, good and bad. Something had shifted. Before today, we were just a bunch of village men thrown together. Now we were becoming a real unit, bound together by blood and trust. And everyone knew who held them together. Not Feng, me. I was their backbone. Walking back to the tents, I told Feng to keep everyone inside the camp for the next 3 days. No incidents, no excuses for Zhou Shang to come after us. He understood. I also told him to start training the support troops alongside the combat soldiers. Out here, there was no such thing as support troops anymore. When Chang cavalry came, they didn't check your rank before cutting you down. Everyone needed to be able to fight. Feng agreed completely. At sunset, Lu Eru was waiting outside the camp with a horse carriage. The Lu family estate sat in the quiet western part of the city, a massive, elegant compound with tall vermilion doors. Coming from my thatched hut and bamboo fence back in Anil village, I'll admit I felt a twinge of jealousy. Zhengbei greeted me at the gate like an old friend. He told me to drop the formalities. Since he was a few years older, I should just call him Brother Zhengbei. I agreed. Inside the reception hall, Lu Ruxue was waiting. She wasn't wearing her veil this time, and I nearly lost my composure. Her face was flawless, pale skin with a natural blush, soft pink lips, and those upturned peach blossom eyes with dark pupils that sparkled like black jade in clear water. Even without a trace of makeup, she'd outshine every celebrity I remembered from my previous life. The title of Anshi's #1 beauty was well-deserved. She offered me a seat and said her father had trouble walking but would arrive shortly. I told her I'd rather stand and wait. I was just a rough man unworthy of being called young master. Then a deep, hearty laugh rang from the courtyard. A powerful-looking middle-aged man in dark robes limped in on a cane, his right leg clearly crippled. Sharp tiger eyes, a hard jaw. This was Lu Qingshan, the family patriarch. A former warrior, no question. He thanked me for saving both his children and waved away my polite protests. Then he got straight to business and called for servants to bring in his gifts. 2 burly house guards carried in a pitch-black iron lance over 10 feet long. Behind them came 2 more, one holding a sleek dark green longbow, and another carrying a leather quiver packed with dozens of arrows. I stared. These were no ordinary weapons. The lance was called the Black Iron Mace Lance. It had belonged to Lu Qingshan's own father. It weighed over 100 pounds. No normal person could even lift it properly, let alone fight with it. Only a 5th-rank martial artist could unleash its true power. It had been gathering dust in the Lu household for 30 years. The bow was called the Green Fish Bow. At full draw, it could kill a target 800 paces away. Also his father's weapon. I tried to refuse, said the gifts were too valuable. Zhengbei insisted, saying his father wasn't giving them out of gratitude alone. He'd heard about my natural-born strength and believed I was the only person who could actually use these weapons. Ruxue joined in too, saying her father wanted me to kill enemies with them. I accepted. These weapons were priceless, worth a fortune each. The Lu family was investing in me, betting on my future. They'd seen what I could do on the training field, and they wanted an ally. I understood the exchange perfectly. They give me weapons and connections, and I repay them with loyalty and results down the road. In the end, people only invest in strength. I promised Lu Qingshan I'd repay him 100-fold someday. He smiled and said his family would be waiting. We sat down to eat. The wine flowed freely, the 4 of us laughing and talking late into the night. By the end, I was face down on the table, completely drunk. Zhengbei had servants carry me to a guest room. Ruxue had slipped away to her own quarters earlier, sensible girl. Next morning at the Lu estate, Zhengbei showed me how the Black Iron Lance splits into 2 pieces. The rear section unscrews and fits into the quiver on my back, leaving the main shaft at about 6 feet. The full weapon is over 9 feet long, pitch black, with an 8-sided spearhead 60 centimeters long that can punch through scale armor and chainmail. I loved it the moment I held it. I rode back to camp carrying the lance in one hand, the green fish bow on my back, and 30 arrows in a leather quiver. The boys crowded around me the second I arrived. Ewer gawked at the lance. Ergu recognized it immediately and called Ewer a country bumpkin for not knowing what a lance mace was. Feng came over and said my visit to the Lu family had clearly paid off. After breakfast, I pulled Feng aside. I told him we needed to requisition more gear before leaving: bows, arrows, large shields, extra spears, and horse carts. He agreed and said he'd been planning to visit the deputy commander anyway. If they wanted us to die at Ningxuan Fort, the least they could do was arm us properly. He came back that evening grinning ear to ear, leading a convoy of over a dozen carts. 100 bow sets with 30 arrows each, 200 spears, 100 man-height shields, and the carts themselves. He'd gotten everything. Other soldiers on the field watched us loading up and shook their heads. They pitied us. Ningxia Fort was over 100 miles away through Chang-controlled territory. Everyone said we were walking dead men. 300 barely trained recruits marching into the wilderness. 3 days later, the south gate opened in darkness. Chen Feng and I led our 300 men out of Anqi City in silence. Just the creak of cart wheels on the road. We marched all night along the main road. By dawn, we reached a village on the edge of a forest. I sent Yuer and Gowa to scout ahead. They came back half an hour later, faces pale. The village was empty, nothing left but dozens of rotting corpses. Women, old people, children as young as 3, all slaughtered. Yuer was shaking with rage. I told Chen Feng we wouldn't enter the village. Everyone ate dry rations in the trees, muzzled the horses, hid the carts under branches, and rested. I split the men into 4 watch groups under Ergu, Yuer, Gowa, and Ernyo, each group taking a 90-minute shift. Chen Feng nodded at every order I gave without argument. On paper, he was in charge. In reality, everyone, including him, followed me. He didn't mind. As long as we reached Ningxia Fort alive, he was happy to let me lead. We'd wait for nightfall, then move again. 5 days of traveling by night and hiding by day, and we finally made it to Ningxia Fort. The mountain road leading up was narrow and steep, littered with broken weapons and dried blood. Clear signs the Chang had tried to attack this place before and paid dearly for it. When the lookout on the wall spotted us, he panicked and screamed that enemies were coming. A big, dark-faced man named Wei Meng came storming out of the barracks cursing, gripping a huge ring pommel saber. A young officer named Li Jun followed him, and then a female squad leader, Bai Yu Shuang, with a purple birthmark covering half her face, leading a group of tall women soldiers. The whole fort snapped into battle formation within minutes. Then the lookout realized we were wearing the dark red uniforms of the Great Qian Army, not Chang tribal gear. Wei Ming kicked the lookout in the backside for the false alarm. Chen Feng and I walked ahead toward the stone gate. He shouted our identification. Qingping County, Nannan District, sent by Governor Qin and Commander Zhou to reinforce the fort. Li Jun came down with 4 soldiers to check our papers and Chun Feng's military badge. Everything matched. Wei Ming verified the governor's handwriting and seal himself, then ordered the gates thrown open. He came down laughing, amazed that his countless letters begging for reinforcements had actually worked. He introduced himself as the fort commander, military envoy Wei Ming. He told us to drop the formalities and just call him Boss Wei. The fort was bigger than I'd expected, built right into the mountainside, with barracks everywhere. The narrow approach road meant attackers couldn't bring many soldiers at once. Taking a fort like this required either piling up bodies or starving the defenders out. Bai Yu Shuang arranged quarters for all 300 of us without a word. Her expression was ice-cold the entire time. Wei Ming told us not to take it personally. That was just how she was. She led Chen Feng and me to a row of officers' quarters near the base of the mountain. Single rooms, 1 per squad leader. I pointed out that I was only a sergeant, not a squad leader, so technically I didn't qualify. Chen Feng jumped in and told Bai Yu Shuang the full story, how I'd single-handedly killed a Chang centurion and 13 riders outside Anqi's walls. By military law, that should have earned me a squad leader's rank at minimum. Bai Yu Shuang's cold eyes swept over me carefully. Then she asked the obvious question. If I'd earned a squad leader position by killing a centurion, why was I only a sergeant? Chen Feng explained to Bai Yu Shuang that I'd been demoted because I'd offended someone powerful. Before he could finish, Wei Ming came striding over and guessed it immediately, Zhou Shang. When Chen Feng confirmed I'd beaten and stabbed Zhou Meng in the arena, Wei Ming's eyes lit up. He said I had guts. Li Jun asked if I was a 4th-rank martial artist. I shook my head and gave my usual explanation, just naturally strong with fast reflexes from years of hunting in the mountains. Wei Ming didn't hesitate. He said if Zhou Shang wouldn't give me squad leader rank, then he would. Right then and there, he made me the 4th squad leader of Ningxia Fort. He told me that here, ability was all that mattered. If I proved capable enough, he'd even hand over his own position. Clearly, Wei Ming had his own grudge against Zhou Shang. Something about saving the man's life years ago outside Liang Province's capital only to be repaid with betrayal. Bai Yuxuang cut in with her icy voice and reminded everyone that the fort was running low on food. We moved to the command hall, really just an oversized wooden hut facing the gate. She laid out the situation bluntly. The fort had 307 soldiers before we arrived, less than 100 stones of grain. With our 300 added, that was over 600 mouths to feed, enough food for only half a month. And 80% of the existing garrison were raw recruits, just like my men. I mentioned that on our way up the mountain, I'd seen unharvested grain and corn in the fields below. Wei Ming shook his head. A village about 15 miles away had 300 Chong cavalry stationed in it, watching the fort. Every time anyone went downhill to gather food, the riders attacked. I asked if it was only 300 horsemen. Li Jun scoffed and said 300 Chong cavalry were worth 3,000 of our men. Each one fought like 10. He was right that we couldn't win a straight fight, so I proposed a night raid instead. Li Jun dismissed it as fantasy. Wei Ming agreed the plan was risky given that most of our soldiers were green. They'd already lost half their garrison and 2 squad leaders in a previous attack by just 1,000 riders. If the Chong really pushed hard, the fort would fall. I dropped the subject and said I understood. But I asked Wei Ming for a guide so I could go down the mountain tomorrow and scout the area myself. He slapped his knee and volunteered Bai Yuxuang, said she knew every village in the region. She agreed without expression. After Chen Feng and I left, I later learned Wei Ming asked his 2 officers what they thought of me. Li Jun said I was brave but reckless, not leadership material. Bai Yuxuang paused and said, bold, careful, and thick-skinned. Wei Ming laughed and teased her about liking me. She ignored him and said the food problem needed solving one way or another, or we'd starve before the Chong ever killed us. Next morning at the gate, Wei Ming spotted the black iron lance in my hand and the green fish bow on my back. His jaw dropped. He recognized them as the Lu family's legendary weapons. He couldn't believe Lu Qingshan had given them to me. I smiled and said the old man apparently saw something in me worth investing in. Wei Ming looked half amazed, half jealous. Chen Feng explained to Wei Ming how I'd gotten in trouble. It all started because I'd helped the Lu siblings and ruined Zhou Meng's plan to grab Rushua. That's why the Lu family gave me the weapons. Wei Ming nodded and said that explained the old man's generosity. I told the boys to stay behind and train. Scouting was a small team job. Too many people would get us caught. Bai Yuxuang said nothing, just grabbed her horse and walked out the gate. I followed. We rode about 3 miles to the edge of a forest overlooking Li family village, where the 300 Chong horsemen were camped. The terrain around the village was flat and open, perfect for cavalry, terrible for an infantry attack. Yuxuang pointed this out immediately, pouring cold water on a frontal assault. But she wasn't against the idea entirely. She told me the Chong soldiers drank heavily every evening, then spent the night with captured women in their tents. The deepest hour of night, around 1 or 2 in the morning, would be the best window for a surprise attack. The key was getting in undetected, and the only covered approach was through the village itself. I asked if she supported the plan. She said flatly, I don't want to starve to death. Fair enough. I told her dying in a fight beat starving any day. We tied our horses to trees and waited for dark. As night fell, I heard rustling in the cornfield nearby. I gripped my lance and crept forward. Yuxuang came up beside me and said to relax, probably local villagers. She was right. About 15 figures emerged from the corn, all children, led by a sharp-eyed boy. I told them not to scream and asked who they were. The boy said his name was Li Chang'an, 15 years old. He and the other kids had been hiding in a cellar during the massacre and escaped 2 nights ago. They'd been living in the cornfields ever since. Every man and elder in the village had been killed. Every woman had been taken. Only these children survived because the Chong didn't find the cellar. I asked if the cornfield connected all the way to the village. He said yes, straight through to a small river bridge behind the village. There were guards at the bridge, but you could wade across the river to avoid them. Then he said something that made my ears perk up. The village had over 1,000 stones of grain hidden underground, and he knew exactly where. I looked at this skinny 15-year-old with fire in his eyes. He said he wanted to eat the Chong soldiers' flesh and drink their blood. They'd killed his parents and taken his sister. When I asked if he'd guide us into the village tonight, he didn't hesitate for a second. I felt a little guilty recruiting a child for a dangerous mission, but desperate times call for desperate measures. With Chang'an leading us through the cornfields and into the village, Yuxuang and I could scout the enemy camp properly. I told Chang'an to have his friends hide in the forest until we got back. Then we'd take everyone to Ningxian Fort. Yushuang watched the whole exchange without expression, but I could tell she approved. Bold, careful, and thick-skinned, her words about me, and she was seeing all three confirmed in real time. The three of us slipped into the tall corn and headed toward the village. Chang'an led us through the cornfield toward the village. Smart kid. He'd even had his friends split up and hide separately in the forest. Yushuang noted that children without parents learn to survive fast. About 100 meters from the river, Chang'an pointed out where the bridge was and where the guard sat. I told him to wait in the corn. If we weren't back in 2 hours, he should retreat to the forest. Yushuang and I crept to the riverbank. I could see 7 or 8 figures huddled around a campfire at the bridge, about 30 meters away. We waited. Around midnight, a thick cloud drifted over the moon and the world went dark. I nudged Yushuang and whispered that it was time. She tested the water depth with her spear, then slipped in. The river was 5 or 6 meters wide, nearly 2 meters deep at the center. We both swam across without being spotted. On the other side, I made a mistake. I looked at Yushuang. Her wet clothes clung to every curve of her body, and she had curves I hadn't noticed under her armor. Even with the birthmark on her left cheek, the right side of her face was beautiful, and those cold, deep eyes only added to it. She caught me staring and crossed her arms over her chest, hissing at me to look away. I apologized, but the damage was done. She was furious. She refused to go further in soaked clothes. I told her to stay hidden by the bank and I'd scout alone. She snapped at me, but let me go, saying I had half an hour. I crept through the dark village, moving past rows of houses. Most were empty. The Chang preferred their tents at the village entrance. But one courtyard had firelight. I pressed against the low mud wall and listened. Inside, a Chang centurion was whipping a man on the ground while another soldier watched. They were talking about prisoners, nearly 100 men crammed into that small yard. Blacksmiths, carpenters, masons, craftsmen captured from surrounding villages. The Chang tribes always grab 4 things during raids: women, gold, grain, and iron workers. Women to breed soldiers, blacksmiths to forge weapons. The centurion kicked the unconscious man, then left with his companion, ordering 4 guards at the gate to watch the prisoners carefully. Anyone else escaped, and they'd lose their heads. This changed everything. Nearly 100 skilled craftsmen. If I could free them during a raid, they'd be an incredible asset for the fort. I kept moving toward the main Chang camp at the village entrance. I spent hours memorizing the layout, tent positions, guard rotations, where the horses were kept, entry and exit points. By the deep hours before dawn, I had a solid picture. I made it back to the river. Yushuang heard my footsteps and challenged me in the dark. I told her I'd found something important, but we needed to cross again first. She groaned. She'd just wrung out her clothes. But she followed me back into the cold water without another word. We crossed the river again. Yushuang wasn't happy about getting soaked a second time. I told her I'd found important things. The Chang camp had sloppy defenses, no barriers around their tents, and there was a courtyard in the village holding nearly 100 captive craftsmen, mostly blacksmiths. She kept catching me glancing at her in the wet clothes. I won't pretend I wasn't looking. Chang'an was still waiting for us in the cornfield. Good kid. I asked if there was somewhere nearby we could make a fire without being spotted. He said there was a hidden hut deep in the forest. He gathered all the children and led us there. I told Chang'an to take the dry rations from our horses. The kids needed food more than we did. He looked like he might cry from gratitude. I promised him a full meal once we got back to Ningxian Fort. Inside the hut, we lit a fire to dry off. That's when I saw something that stopped me cold. The firelight hit Yushuang's face, and the purple birthmark was gone. Completely gone. Underneath was one of the most beautiful faces I'd ever seen. Perfectly sculpted features, flawless skin, stunning even compared to my 5 wives. I blurted out that her face was beautiful. She panicked, covered her cheek with her hand, then grabbed her silver spear and pressed the tip against my throat. I asked what I'd done wrong. She cursed me, said it was my fault she'd been dunked in river water twice, which disrupted her body's chi and caused the medicine maintaining her fake birthmark to wear off. So the birthmark had been a disguise all along. A woman that beautiful serving in the military would attract endless trouble, so she'd been hiding her real face with some kind of herbal trick. She threatened to kill me if I ever told anyone. I raised 3 fingers and swore on heaven and earth. This secret stayed between us. She finally lowered the spear. Then she told me to turn around so she could dry her clothes by the fire. I heard fabric rustling behind me. She warned me that if I peeked, she'd kill me. I told her proudly that I had 5 gorgeous wives at home and had no reason to peek. She scoffed and said she didn't believe anyone would marry me. I told her she was welcome to visit my home someday and see for herself. She spat back that she'd never go to my house. I moved to the doorway to keep watch. She said she'd sleep 1 hour, then we'd switch. I shrugged and let her rest. She slept right through her shift. I didn't wake her. She needed it more than I did. I found her clothes dry by the fire, so I draped them over her carefully without touching her. At dawn, I finally woke her. She bolted upright, arms crossed over her chest, glaring at me with suspicion. I told her I hadn't done anything, just covered her with her dried clothes. That's all. She asked why I hadn't woken her for her watch shift. I told Yuxuang I'd let her sleep because I wasn't tired. Days of night marching had adjusted my body clock. What I didn't tell her was that she talks in her sleep. Candied hawthorn, braised pork elbow, sweet and sour fish. She was dreaming about a feast. Tough and cold on the outside, but apparently dreaming about snacks like a little girl. She only had 3 pills left for her fake birthmark. Once those ran out, her real face would be exposed permanently. That worried her more than any Chang cavalry. We brought Chang'an and the 15 children back to the fort. I told you to feed them and find them a place to sleep. Then I headed straight for the command hall. Everyone was waiting. I laid out everything I'd found. The Chang camp had loose defenses, no barriers, no fortifications around their tents. Guards got drunk every night. And in the village, nearly 100 captured blacksmiths and craftsmen were locked in a courtyard. On top of that, Chang'an said there were over 1,000 stones of grain hidden underground. Li Jun shook his head and said it was too risky. The Chang would leave eventually, and the craftsmen weren't worth the gamble. But when Wei Ming asked Yuxuang, she looked me in the eye and said, I agree with Commander Wang. Fight. Chen Feng slammed the table and said he was in. Wei Ming grinned, 4-1. Li Jun sighed but accepted the majority decision. Everyone looked at me for the plan. I'd been working it out since the moment I left that village. 300 spearmen, led by Yuxuang and me, would sneak through the cornfield and river into the village at night, then hit the camp from behind. Meanwhile, Chen Feng and Li Jun would hide 100 shield soldiers and 100 archers in the cornfield facing the camp entrance. Once the spearmen broke the enemy inside, the shields would block the gate, and the archers would pick off anyone trying to escape. Wei Ming approved instantly, then insisted on joining the assault personally. We'd move in 2 days. Until then, every soldier would drill hard. This battle had to succeed. If we failed, the fort was finished. Wei Ming reorganized the entire garrison. 600 soldiers total. He'd command 200 himself. The other 400 split evenly between me, Chen Feng, Yuxuang, and Li Jun, 100 each. Every squad leader had to pick a deputy who'd sit in on command meetings. Back in the barracks, I asked Ernyo, Yuer, and Go Hua who wanted to be my deputy. Yuer said he didn't care about titles. He just wanted to stay by my side. Ernyo said Go Hua was the smartest and should do it. Go Hua tried to refuse, saying he was the weakest fighter. I cut the debate short and told Go Hua it was him. I promised all 3 that deputy squad leader was nothing. They'd climb much higher than this. The other deputies were chosen quickly. Chen Feng picked Ergu, naturally. Yuxuang chose a huge, fierce woman named Sun Daniyu, nicknamed Sun the Beast. Li Jun selected a steady old veteran called Old Li. Wei Ming picked 2 experienced soldiers from the original garrison, Shen Feng and Jui Dao. 600 soldiers. 1 commander, for squad leaders, 6 deputies. Ningxuan Fort finally had a real chain of command. In 2 days, we'd see if it held together. 3 days later, 500 soldiers stood at the gate, ready to march. Wei Ming gave the speech. We outnumbered the enemy. This was our fight to win, and anyone who ran or hesitated would be executed on the spot. The men roared back. 2 days of hard drilling had sharpened them, and my Qingping boys were especially fired up. They'd seen me fight outside Anshi's walls, and I'd spent the last 2 days talking up the plan until every one of them believed we could win. Chang'an and his friendly Changshan ran up and begged to come along. I refused at first. They were just 15. But Chen Feng pointed out that having local guides in the dark would help the march. I agreed on the condition they stayed by our sides and didn't fight. Chang'an would go with me into the village. Changshan would guide Chen Feng's ambush group. We marched in silence through the night. 500 men like a black dragon snaking through the darkness. Wei Ming rode at the front in black armor. carrying an 80-pound, 7-foot broadsword called the Black Dragon Blade. The rest of us walked. By 1 in the morning, we reached the tree line 3 miles from the village. Wei Ming split us up according to plan. 300 spearmen with me, Yu Shuang, and Wei Ming would sneak through the village and hit the camp from behind. Chen Feng and Li Jun would take 200 shields and archers and hide in the cornfield near the camp entrance. When they saw fire inside the camp, they'd seal the gate. Wei Ming told me I had full command of the assault force. I sent Changshan with Chun Feng's group to find the best hiding position near the camp gate. Then I led 300 soldiers into the cornfield. We reached the clearing 100 meters from the river and waited. I checked the water clock. Not yet. When the hour struck, I told the main force to hold position. Yu Shuang and I would go ahead to clear the bridge guards first. Yuer and the boys wanted to come, but Wei Ming shut them down. This was my call. Yu Shuang and I knew this stretch of ground by heart. At the riverbank, I could see 2 guards pacing the bridge and firelight from a small camp beside it. I told Yu Shuang I'd swim across to cut off their retreat while she crept along the bank from this side. My arrow would be the signal. I stripped down to my shorts. No point getting my uniform soaked again, and slid into the freezing water with my lance holding my clothes above the surface. Yu Shuang looked away with a quiet curse. On the far side, I positioned myself behind the bridge. 2 guards walked back and forth on top, while a big bearded one lay under a tree by the fire, wrapped in a stolen cotton blanket. One of his friends told him to get up and do his job. He grumbled and went back to sleep. I knocked 2 arrows on the green fish bough. Both flew true, 1 for each guard on the bridge. The first took an arrow through the chest and tried to shout a warning, but only managed to gurgle before collapsing. The second toppled straight into the river with a splash. The bearded one sat up, confused. Before he could stand, Yu Shuang's arrow punched through his heart from the riverbank. He whispered something about enemies and went limp. The bridge was clear. Not a sound reached the camp. After killing the 3 bridge guards, Yu Shuang and I dealt with the 5 sleeping ones nearby. One woke up mid-attack and asked who we were. I told him we were the people who'd come to kill him, and drove my lance through his heart. 8 guards dead without raising the alarm. I waved a burning torch in the air, the signal I'd arranged with Yuer back in our hunting days. Safe to move. Within minutes, Wei Ming led 300 soldiers across the bridge and into the village. I told Wei Ming to wait while Yu Shuang and I went ahead to clear the 4 guards at the craftsman's courtyard. We killed them silently. Another torch signal, and the army advanced to within 30 steps of the Chong camp. 2 watchtowers guarded the camp perimeter, each manned by a sentry. I told Yu Shuang we'd each take 1, count of 3, shoot together. We stood, drew, and released. Both arrows hit perfectly. The sentries slumped dead on their platforms without a sound. Yu Shuang and I climbed over the flimsy wooden fence and took the 2 towers ourselves. From up there, we had a clear view of the entire camp. I told her our job now was to shoot down any Chong soldier who tried to rally the others. Never let them group up. I waved the torch from the tower. Wei Ming saw it and gave the order. Brothers, slaughter them all. 100 men shoved the wooden fence down with a massive crash. That woke the camp. A half-naked Chong soldier stepped out of his tent to see what happened. My arrow put him on the ground before he could open his mouth. Wei Ming organized the assault. 10 men per tent, clear them one by one. From my tower, Yu Shuang and I kept firing at anyone who emerged. Over a dozen went down in the first minute. A Chong centurion burst from his tent in leather armor, shouting for everyone to rally at the commander's tent. I shot at him. He managed to deflect my arrow with his saber, but the force of the impact knocked him stumbling backward into the tent. Wei Ming was a beast. He tore through one tent after another with that enormous black sword, cutting down 7 or 8 soldiers before they could even grab their weapons. Inside, he found terrified naked women, captives the Chong had taken. He told them to stay put and kept killing. In the center of the camp, the Chong commander, a 1,000-man officer called Mu Lang, stood half-dressed outside his main tent, watching the chaos with fury. A bodyguard brought 2 horses and begged him to flee. Mu Lang demanded to know where his 2 centurions were. The bodyguard said they couldn't be found. The camp was falling apart. Our men swept through tent by tent while Yu Shuang and I picked off anyone trying to organize resistance from above. The Chong had been caught drunk, asleep, and scattered. They never had a chance to form a line. Mu Lang cursed us and jumped on a horse to flee. I shot an arrow that grazed his ear, close enough to make him sweat. but he rallied about a dozen mounted soldiers and charged for the gate. I emptied my quiver from the watchtower, then grabbed my lance and leaped down. The ground shook when I landed, and I planted myself right in the cavalry's path. Mu Lang screamed for them to kill me and led the charge. I launched myself at him, driving my lance at his chest. Our weapons clashed with a terrible screech of metal. My strength sent him flying off his horse. But before I could finish him, his men wheeled around and came at me. Then 2 centurions showed up with dozens more riders. Suddenly, I was outnumbered. Mu Lang got back on another horse and ordered them all to focus on me. Things were getting bad. Then Wei Ming came roaring in with 300 soldiers, and the battlefield tilted back our way. Mu Lang saw the tide turning and ordered a breakout toward the camp gate. Nearly 100 horsemen charged together. Even I had to dodge out of the way. They burst through the gate expecting open fields. Instead, they found a killing ground. Li Jun's archers were waiting. The first volley dropped 30 riders. Then Xin Fang's shield wall appeared, 100 men with tall shields and long spears forming a half-circle around the gate. Mu Lang spotted the weakness immediately, only about 100 men blocking the exit. He ordered another charge. Li Jun commanded free fire. Another rain of arrows cut them down to fewer than 30. Those 30 slammed into Chun Fang's shield line. Spears punched through horses and riders. A dozen of our shield soldiers got knocked flying by the impact, bones shattered. But the line held. Mu Lang broke through to Chun Feng personally, killing one of our men with a savage slash. 10 shield soldiers surrounded him instantly. Then Yu Shuang and I arrived with 100 more spearmen, sealing the trap completely. Mu Lang had maybe 15 riders left. He tried one last desperate charge straight at me. I met him head-on. He swung his curved sword at my skull. I blocked with my lance. One hit knocked his blade spinning through the air. I jumped, thrust, and punched the lance head clean through his chest. He spat blood and died. His 2 centurions saw their commander fall and charged at me in a frenzy. I flicked Mu Lang's body off my lance and hurled it into one of them, sending horse and rider crashing down. Our spearmen swarmed the fallen centurion. Yu Shuang's group surrounded and killed the other one along with the last handful of riders. Not a single Chang soldier was left standing. Wei Ming raised his massive sword overhead and roared with laughter. Li Jun walked over with Qin Feng, staring at the carpet of enemy corpses, clearly amazed it had worked. Wei Ming declared I'd earned top credit for this battle and ordered everyone to sweep the camp, grab every horse, every sack of grain, every weapon, and haul it all back to Ningxia Fort. We'd done it. 300 Chang cavalry, wiped out in a single night. The camp was burning behind us. Yuer came running to report that 400 or 500 captured women had been found inside the tents, all taken by the Chang. Wei Ming said to bring them all back to the fort. Deputy Xin Feng came with even better news. Over 300 warhorses and more than 500 stones of grain captured. Wei Ming ordered everything useful loaded onto carts. Anything we couldn't carry would be burned. Not a single grain left for the enemy. I told Gowa to collect every Chang corpse and hang them on the camp fence. Wei Ming asked why. I told him 2 reasons: to send a message and to bait the Chang into attacking Ningxia Fort. He looked at me like I was crazy, but I explained my thinking. We'd just killed 300 of their cavalry. They'd want revenge no matter what. Better to draw them to our mountain fortress where the terrain favored us than wait for them to catch us in the open. The narrow approach meant they couldn't bring overwhelming numbers, and with enough food, we could outlast them. Winter was coming. They couldn't afford a long siege. I sent Yuer and Chang'an back to the village to dig up the hidden grain, over 1,000 stones. Plus the nearly 100 craftsmen locked in that courtyard. With blacksmiths and iron or already sitting in our mountain, we could start forging our own weapons. By morning, we marched back to the fort, a column stretching over 1,000 meters. Horses, grain carts, rescued women, freed craftsmen, captured weapons. It was quite a sight. Then I made my pitch. I told Wei Ming I wanted to build a cavalry unit. He nearly fell over. Cavalry were expensive. A warhorse ate 10 times what a soldier did. Xin Feng agreed it sounded crazy. But Yu Shuang spoke up immediately and said she supported the idea and volunteered to command it. Li Jun backed her too. I said we didn't need a huge force, just 100 riders. That was manageable with 300 captured horses. This small cavalry unit would be our trump card. Wei Ming gave in. He handed full authority over the cavalry project to Yu Shuang and me, plus first pick of any soldier in the fort. But he warned us we'd have to figure out equipment on our own. After everyone went inside, I stayed behind with Yushuang by the horses. I asked if she could train cavalry. She said she knew a few things. I told her I needed 100 riders ready in 2 weeks, disciplined enough to stay calm under pressure. Our survival depended on it. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. 100 riders against thousands of Chang cavalry? I told her I didn't plan to fight them head-on. I was thinking raids, fire attacks, hit and run. She shook her head but didn't refuse. She said she'd give me a basic cavalry force in half a month. Then she wanted to see exactly how I planned to use 100 men to beat an army. She rode off with the horses toward an abandoned horse ranch 20 miles southeast, where there was a valley with good grassland. Yuder brought me a horse and asked if we were following Yushuang. Of course we were. I jumped on and galloped after her. Behind me, Yuer was bouncing around on his saddle, yelling at me to slow down because he didn't know how to ride properly yet. 10 days after the raid, Ningxuan Fort had transformed. The open-pit mining area was roaring with activity, dozens of smelting furnaces blazing, bellows pumping, and over 100 blacksmiths hammering away day and night. Everyone in the fort, men and women alike, had joined the effort to produce weapons and arrows before the Chang came for revenge. The biggest breakthrough was something I'd brought from my previous life, the cast steel method. It took several tries under my guidance, but the blacksmiths finally mastered it. This technique produced steel far stronger and sharper than anything we'd been using. That alone gave me real confidence about the coming fight. I deliberately kept our raid a secret from Anchi City and the surrounding towns. The longer the Chang took to discover what happened, the more time we had to prepare. In the command hall, Yuer reported that a few Chang scouts had finally come to check on the Li family village camp that morning. Our archers turned them into pincushions. That meant the clock was ticking, 5 days at most before a Chang army showed up at our doorstep. Gowa, now handling logistics as my deputy, gave me the numbers. Refugees had been streaming into the fort, pushing our population toward 2,000. Food could last 3 months for the people, but the 300 warhorses were eating us alive. With them, we only had 2 weeks. I decided to sell 100 horses to ease the pressure and keep 200. You were asked about claiming rewards for the battle. Wei Ming grinned and said he'd send a war report to Anchi tomorrow, partly for the recognition, partly because he wanted to see Commander Zhou Shang's face when he read it. I pointed out that what we really needed wasn't silver, but an official expansion of our garrison roster. We had nearly 1,000 soldiers now. The paperwork needed to catch up. Wei Ming agreed. The governor and Zhou Shang needed our victories on their record to avoid punishment from the imperial court for losing the Western Pass. They'd approve whatever we asked. Wei Ming asked about my plans for the 200 special soldiers he'd set aside for me. I told him they'd be my surprise force. Combined with Yushuang's 100 cavalry, they'd hit the Chang army's camp at night while the main force held the fort. He stared at me. "You want to night raid them again?" I smiled. "Why not?" He threw up his hands and said from now on, I was in charge of all battle planning. He'd just show up and kill people. I tried to protest, but he said whoever had the ability should lead, even if that meant he became a common soldier. Then Old Li walked in carrying a brand new sword, the first ring pommel saber forged with our cast steel method. I grabbed it and turned it over in my hands. The blade was straight, over 3 feet long, with a deep blood groove. Li Jun scoffed and said it looked no different from a standard army sword. I challenged him to test it against his own blade. He drew his sword and struck. Metal crashed against metal. Li Jun stumbled back 2 steps, and his prized sword had a chip in its edge. My saber was untouched. He stared at it in shock and said the cast steel had reached the quality of 100-fold forged steel. I told Old Li to have the smiths work around the clock. I needed 200 ring pommel sabers in 5 days, plus 200 round shields and 300 sets of leather armor from the women's workshop. The Chang were coming, and when they arrived, my men would be armed with the best weapons in the province. I gave the first ring pommel saber to Li Jun. His own sword had been chipped when he tested it against my blade, so it seemed fair. He took it without hesitation, and I could see something shift in his eyes. He'd been looking down on me since I arrived, thought I was just a brute with good luck. That small gesture changed things between us. I ordered Yuer to push our scouts out to 30 miles and report the moment any Chang army was spotted. Back at the Green Valley Horse Ranch, I told Yushuang about selling 100 horses and the 200 extra soldiers Wei Ming had given me. She nodded. 300 men total at the ranch, 100 cavalry and 200 infantry. Not a bad strike force. I told her these 200-foot soldiers were also future cavalry reserves. Once the Chong were driven out of Anxi, we'd build a proper mounted army. She said it wouldn't be easy. I said all we needed was men, money, and horses. Time would handle the rest. Over the next 4 days, the entire fort became a weapons factory. The blacksmiths worked around the clock forging ring pommel sabers. The women's workshop sewed what I call the simplified version of bright armor, a thin plate of 100-fold steel over the chest with captured Chong leather covering the rest. It looked rough, but tests proved it could stop a blade. These 300 sets went to my ranch soldiers first. The 700 in the fort still wore their thin, red uniforms. At the ranch, the 200 saber and shield soldiers drilled in formation combat, while the 100 cavalry practiced throwing javelins from horseback and charging with lances. Yushuang was curious about the javelin idea. She admitted it was much simpler to learn than mounted archery. I told her if I'd had more time, I'd have built repeating crossbows for each rider. She asked what a repeating crossbow was. I just smiled and said she'd find out eventually. My real find during these days was Wang Wu, a 47-year-old, one-armed retired veteran of the Imperial Guard. He was lean and dark-skinned, missing his left arm, but with just his right, he could fight Yushuang to a standstill for dozens of rounds. He became my infantry instructor. Wang Wu taught me the Army's official 13 cuts saber technique. With my above-average intelligence stat, I compressed the 13 moves down to 8 and renamed it Blood Battle 8 Cuts. Each strike targeted a vital area. Efficient, lethal, perfect for chaotic battlefield conditions. Wang Wu tested it and approved, saying it would dramatically shorten training time without sacrificing killing power. After learning the technique, my system panel updated with a new category, Martial Skills. Blood Battle 8 Cuts appeared with a proficiency of 5. The system also revealed new rules. Martial skill proficiency couldn't be boosted with attribute points, only through practice. And once all 4 main stats hit 100, I'd unlock the ability to freely assign new points to any attribute or use them to level up cultivation techniques. My current stats had grown steadily from combat: strength 30, stamina 28, agility 25, intelligence 15. But killing Chong soldiers had given far fewer points than I'd hoped. Without my wives around, growth had slowed to a crawl. I missed them, for more reasons than just the system. Wang Wu told me I was the most talented person he'd ever met, strong learner, unmatched in combat, destined for greatness. Yushuang glanced at me with a slight smile when he said it. Then a messenger galloped in, pale-faced. Wei Ming wanted us back at the fort immediately. The Chong army had been spotted. I left Wang Wu in charge of the ranch and rode hard with Yushuang, Ernyo, and Gowa back to Ningxuan. The command hall was tense. Wei Ming laid it out. 5,000 Chong soldiers would reach our mountain by evening, 10 times our numbers. Worse, they brought siege engines and catapults. They weren't treating this like a raid anymore. They wanted to crush us. Everyone looked at me for a plan. I said one word: stall. I needed the fort to hold for at least 5 days. On the 5th night, I'd lead my 300 ranch soldiers in a surprise attack on their camp. Li Jun shook his head. Holding 5 days against 5,000 with our defenses and green troops would be nearly impossible. I told him the key wasn't walls, it was willpower. If we could bloody the Chong hard in the first 3 days and break their momentum, the rest would get easier. A siege is a mental battle. Whoever cracks first loses. Wei Ming asked what my odds were if they held 5 days. I said 7 out of 10. He asked about 10 days. I said certain victory. He stood up and declared he'd give me 10 days. If we couldn't win after that, he'd die with the fort. Then he broke the good news. Anxi City had finally responded to our battle report. Wei Ming was promoted to 1,000-man captain. I jumped 2.5 ranks, from sergeant all the way to deputy captain. Yushuang, Li Jun, Chen Feng, Gowa, and Ergu all moved up to military envoy rank. Ergu couldn't believe it. He kept mumbling that he'd actually become an officer. Chen Feng laughed and told him if we won this battle, he'd make full captain. Wei Ming confirmed it. Defeat 5,000 Chong, and everyone here would rise dramatically. Wei Ming formally announced that if he fell in battle or was absent, I would take command of Ningxuan Fort. Everyone accepted without argument. I told Wei Ming I needed to take all the finished equipment back to the ranch immediately. Over 100 ring pommel sabers, 300 sets of armor, and about 900 javelins. He handed it all over. I told the room that on the 10th night, I'd come. Until then, the fort's survival rested on their shoulders. Chen Feng thumped his chest and said as long as he was breathing, the fort would stand. Wei Ming sealed the mountain, From this moment, nobody leaves. I rode back to the ranch with Yu Shuang, Ernyo, Gowa, Yuer, and Chang in an hour before the enemy arrived. From the hilltop, we could see the Chang army pouring across the valley below, thousands of campfires flickering to life, over 1,000 riders patrolling the fields around their massive camp. Up on the fort wall, Wei Ming and the others watched the same scene. He said it looked like the Chang were planning a long siege. 10 days. That was the deal. On the 10th night, I'd end this. I wasn't at the fort when it started. I was 20 miles away at the ranch, preparing my 300 men for the night raid that would come on day 10. But I heard every detail later from Wei Ming and the others. That first night, the Chang didn't even wait until morning. Their commander, a 10,000-man general named Mo Ganzhan of the Black Mountain tribe, was furious about what we'd done to his men at Li family village. He'd brought 5,000 warriors and was determined to crush us fast. He sent 1,000 riders out as patrols to make sure nobody slipped away, then ordered an immediate assault. The Black Mountain tribe had something to prove. The White Wolf tribe had tried attacking Ningxia Fort before and retreated after losing just 100 men. Mo Ganzhan wanted to show the other tribes that Black Mountain could crack what White Wolf couldn't. He sent Centurion Bergen with 500 infantry up the narrow mountain path, backed by 200 archers under another officer named Batelli. A third commander, Dewar, suggested waiting for the catapults to be assembled first, since our archers on the high walls would outrange theirs. Mo Ganzhan shut him down, said the fort was just a few hundred green recruits and some women and children, not worth waiting for siege engines. Up on the wall, Wei Ming watched the torches climbing the mountain path. He told the archers to hold fire and let them get close. The path to the gate was narrow. Only 7 or 8 men could walk side by side. When the first wave of Chang soldiers burst into the open ground before the wall, Wei Ming gave the order. 100 archers, split into 2 teams firing alternately, unleashed wave after wave of arrows. The first 2 volleys cut down most of the lead group. Bodies piled up on the open ground. But more kept coming, carrying 10-meter siege ladders, screaming about the gold and women waiting inside. Batelli's 200 archers tried to provide cover fire from the mountain path, but they were shooting uphill at defenders behind stone walls, nearly useless. Meanwhile, Li Jun took command of our bowmen with icy precision, directing volley after volley. Every round of arrows dropped another dozen or 20 enemies. When enough Chang soldiers had pushed through to the base of the wall and started raising ladders, Li Jun split the archers. Half moved to the top of the gate tower to shoot down the length of the mountain path, turning it into a killing corridor. The other half stayed on the walls, picking off climbers and anyone in the open ground below. Wei Ming had already sealed the gate with sandbags. Even a battering ram wouldn't break through. The entire battle would be decided on those 50 meters of wall. Sun Daniu, Yu Shuang's fierce deputy, brought 100 spearmen up to the wall to stab at anyone who reached the top of the ladders. The defense was holding. The narrow terrain was doing exactly what I'd predicted, funneling the enemy into a tight space where our archers could slaughter them. The real war had begun, and I had 9 more days to wait. The first attack lasted 2 hours before the Chang horns sounded retreat at midnight. Wei Ming told me later they'd killed 300 or 400 enemy soldiers. It was only a probing attack. The real storm would come in the next 2 days. Chen Feng was honest about what he'd seen. Our soldiers couldn't match the Chang man for man. The enemy fighters were fearless, while most of ours had never seen blood before this night. If the Chang ever got full control of the wall, it would be over. Wei Ming agreed, but said blood was the only teacher. A few more days of this, and our men would harden. Down at the enemy camp, their commander Mo Ganzhan, a 10,000-man general, wasn't worried about the failed first assault. He'd sent it as a test. His Centurion Bergen reported that the fort had strong defenses, plenty of archers, and at least 500 combat troops. Mo Ganzhan said he'd give Bergen 2,000 men the next morning, plus 500 archers and catapults. He ordered 3 other centurions to patrol a 10-mile radius and make sure no reinforcements reached us. In Anchi City, Governor Qin held an emergency meeting. His scouts couldn't get close enough to see what was happening at our fort. He wanted to send help, but had nothing to send. The district was crawling with 60,000 Chang across 3 tribal armies. The nearest county town, Linqing, was under siege by 10,000 Black Mountain troops. Commander Zhou Shang shot down every suggestion for relief. Deputy Commander Zheng Yuanshan, the same man who'd helped us at the North Camp, asked about sending Zheng Bei from Copper Mountain Fort. Zhou Shang blocked that too, saying 1,000 soldiers would just be feeding them to the cavalry. Zheng Yuanshan raised a darker question. He wondered whether the provincial governor had secretly made a deal with the Chang, since the tribes were only raiding Anxi district and leaving the other 3 districts completely alone. Zhou Shang shut him down and said the governor was simply being strategic. Nobody in that room believed him. The governor ended the meeting with nothing decided. Ningxuan Fort was on its own. 20 miles away at the ranch, I gathered my people around a long table in the dim lamplight. Yu Shuang, Go Hua, Yu Er, Ernyo, Wang Wu, and Chang'an all sat waiting. I gave my orders. Yu Er would lead scouts to monitor Chang patrol movements within 30 miles, but under no circumstances could they be caught. If spotted, they were to run toward Nan'an district, away from the ranch, not toward it. We couldn't risk the enemy discovering our hidden force. Yu Shuang and Wang Wu would keep training inside the valley only. No noise. No one leaving the canyon mouth. The cavalry would drill formations. Of the 200 infantry, half would practice blood battle 8 cuts. The other half would train in spear formations. We had days left. Every hour counted. Out there in the darkness, I could almost hear the faint rumble of battle echoing from the mountain. Wei Ming was bleeding for every hour I needed. I wouldn't waste a single one. I got the reports from the fort throughout those early days. The second morning, the Chang came again, this time in daylight with over 1,000 men and siege ladders. Chun Feng commanded the wall defense brilliantly. Our 300 archers rained arrows down the narrow mountain path. Every wave of attackers that reached the open ground before the wall got cut apart. The Chang centurion Bergen ordered his men to stack their own dead into ramps against the wall. Chun Feng was ready for that. He had fire oil hauled up in clay jars. When the Chang started climbing over corpses and ladders, he poured the oil down and lit it with fire arrows. The whole base of the wall erupted in flames. Over 100 Chang soldiers were swallowed by fire in seconds. The screaming echoed across the entire mountain. The men still on the path turned pale and refused to advance. Bargan pulled back and called for catapult support. Batelli had 5 heavy stone throwers positioned below, and they started launching 100-pound rocks at the fort. The first volleys missed completely, the angle was tricky, and the fort was built into the mountainside. After several adjustments, they started hitting the wall and gate, but the stone construction held firm. The rocks simply weren't heavy enough to break through. So Bargan charged again with 1,000 men, while Batelli's archers tried to suppress our bowmen on the wall. The fighting lasted all day, from dawn until sunset. By the time the horns finally sounded retreat, nearly 1,000 Chang soldiers lay dead or wounded. Bargan himself took an arrow in the arm. That night in the enemy camp, Mo Ganshan was furious. He ordered 3 centurions to combine forces for a massive assault the next day. He had to take the fort or none of them would be allowed to return to the grasslands. One of his officers, Batelli, carefully suggested abandoning the siege and raiding south into Nan'an district instead. Mo Ganshan exploded, revealed that their great Khan had made a secret deal with Liang province's governor, Guo Fengxian. They were only allowed to raid Anxi district. The other 3 districts were off-limits. That confirmed what Deputy Commander Zheng had suspected back in the city. The governor had sold out Anxi to the Chang in some kind of backroom agreement. Meanwhile, Yuer's scouts had been spotted by Chang patrols, but Mo Ganshan dismissed them as Nan'an observers too scared to intervene. He had no idea my 300 soldiers were hidden just 20 miles away, training day and night in a hidden valley, waiting for the 10th night. At the ranch, I could feel the clock ticking with every distant rumble that carried over the hills. Wei Ming was paying for my time and blood. I pushed my men harder, blood battle 8 cuts until their arms shook, javelin throws until their shoulders burned, cavalry charges until the horses were foaming. 7 days left. Back at the fort, Wei Ming held a war council after the second day's fighting. He told everyone the next 9 days would be brutal, and they had to hold at any cost. Chun Feng's voice was hoarse and his eyes were bloodshot. He'd been on the wall all day. Wei Ming announced he'd personally command from the gate tower the next morning. Erga mentioned that the ring pommel sabers were devastating in close combat. One swing could split a Chang helmet, and the skull underneath clean in 2. Old Li said they had about 30 finished, with maybe 15 more by morning. 50 sabers rotating among the wall defenders, paired with 50 spearmen, would be enough to hold the battlements. Chun Feng said the key was simple. Every Chang soldier who climbed over the top would get chopped down. As long as they kept that up, the wall wouldn't fall. At my ranch, Yue reported what he'd seen from a distance. The fighting had been savage. The Chong even used their catapults, though the accuracy was terrible. They'd actually killed a few of their own men with bad shots. I estimated the enemy still had over 4,000 combat-ready soldiers. The fort's losses should be much smaller thanks to the defensive advantage. Without effective catapults, the next 2 days would come down to pure willpower. Who cracked first? Yu Shuang said quietly that as long as Wei Ming stood on that wall, the fort wouldn't break. Guo and Ernyo agreed. Wei Ming was our anchor. Ernyo described watching him cleave 3 Chong soldiers with a single swing during the night raid. Said he looked like a war god. Then Yu Shuang said something that caught my attention. She mentioned Wei Ming was probably a 5th-rank blood ignition martial artist. I'd been hearing these ranks thrown around since I arrived. 4th rank this, 5th rank that. And I finally admitted I had no idea what any of it meant. I'd never studied martial cultivation. Yu Shuang stared at me in disbelief. How could someone with my strength not know the martial ranking system? I shrugged and repeated my usual excuse about natural-born power and lots of exercise. She sighed and explained the whole system. 9 ranks of martial cultivation. First rank is aperture opening, unlocking the body's meridian points through herbal baths or with help from a 7th-rank master. Second rank is skin tempering, hardening the body's outer layer and dramatically increasing raw strength. Third rank is bone forging. Together with skin tempering, these 2 ranks give you what they call copper skin and iron bones, making you nearly immune to ordinary weapons. Fourth rank is blood chi, learning to sense and absorb spiritual energy from the environment, converting it into internal power. Fifth rank is blood ignition, burning your own blood energy through special techniques to multiply your combat power several times over for short bursts. Sixth rank is meridian opening, unlocking all 8 extraordinary meridians, reaching 10,000 pounds of force in a single punch. Seventh rank is shackle breaking, shattering the body's 8 inner gates, achieving tens of thousands of pounds of striking force. These are the true powerhouses who command entire armies. 8th and 9th ranks she called Mountain River and Grandmaster, but she admitted she didn't know the specifics of either. I listened carefully and mapped it against my own stats. My strength was at 30, 6 times a normal man. That apparently put me around 5th rank level without ever having cultivated a single technique. If my system panel ever unlocked the cultivation function, I could potentially combine natural attributes with martial arts. The thought made me grin, but that was for later. Right now, I had 8 days left before the raid. Every hour of training counted. Before the war councils and training sessions, Yue had asked Yu Shuang what rank she was. She said she and Li Jun were both early 4th rank blood chi martial artists, second strongest in the fort after Wei Ming. When Yue asked about me, she glanced my way and said somewhere between 5th and 6th rank, though she wasn't sure. Wang Wu was more precise. He said I could match a peak 5th rank fighter, maybe even beat one. Yuer's jaw dropped. I told him not to get too excited. A 5th rank martial artist facing hundreds of Chong cavalry would still have to run for his life. Raw power only goes so far. Ernyo asked if an 8th or 9th rank fighter could take on hundreds of horsemen alone. Wang Wu's eyes lit up. He said he'd personally witnessed a 7th rank warrior charge through thousands of soldiers 3 times and lead 800 men to rout 7,000 elite troops. That was the Battle of Liang Mountain, 20 years ago, and Wang Wu had been one of those 800 soldiers under the command of Duke Xinghua, Wu Chang'e. I asked who Duke Xinghua was. Yu Shuang told me flatly that I wasn't important enough to meet him yet. Maybe once I'd driven every Chong rider back to the grasslands, I'd get the chance. She really did enjoy putting me in my place. 9 days ground passed. Each one brought reports from the fort that were harder to hear. By the 9th evening, the wall was barely holding. Chen Feng could hardly speak. His voice was gone, his face caked in dried blood. Ergu had wounds all over his body, but refused to leave the wall. Li Jun's left arm had been slashed to the bone. He'd wrapped it himself and kept fighting. When Wei Ming asked how many soldiers could still fight, Li Jun said about 300. They'd started with 700. But the Chong had paid far worse. Of 5,000, barely 2,000 were still combat ready. 9 days of charging up that narrow mountain path into arrows, fire oil, spears, and ring pommel sabers had bled them white. The fighting that 9th night was savage, from dusk until deep into the darkness. The Chong came again and again. Wei Ming stood on the wall with his saber the entire time. When the horns finally sounded retreat, the fort still stood. In the enemy camp, General Mo Ganshan was struggling to contain his rage. 5,000 men, half gone, and a tiny mountain fort still defied him. His 5 centurions dropped to their knees and signed blood oaths. They swore to break the fort within 2 days or forfeit their heads. Mo Ganshan gave them the deadline. 2 days. After that, no mercy. At my ranch that same night, I gathered everyone for final preparations. Tomorrow morning, I'd send Yuer with a few men to lure some Chong scouts toward the Tianshui River. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to keep them following. Gowa immediately understood. I wanted to capture a few alive and interrogate them about the enemy camp's current state. Ernyo didn't get it. Gowa had to explain it to him. I pointed at Ernyo and told him to use his brain more or stop telling people we're from the same village. Wang Wu asked if tomorrow night was the night. I told him yes, but he was staying at the ranch. He protested, insisting he could still fight better than my 3 deputies combined with 1 arm. Yu Shuang stepped in and explained it gently. It wasn't about his ability. If something happened to him, who would train our future soldiers? Who would teach blood battle 8 cuts to the next generation? I jumped on that. Exactly. You're our treasure, old Wang. Can't risk you. He grumbled, but accepted it. Yu Shuang shot me a look for stealing her argument. I gave her a thumbs up behind my back. She rolled her eyes. Tomorrow night. The 10th night. Time to end this. I told everyone to rest the next day. No training. Save their energy for the night. Yu Shuang's cavalry needed to wrap their horses' hooves in cloth and muzzle them for silence. I told Wang Wu he'd be guarding the ranch after we left, possibly for several days. He swore nobody would set foot in the valley while he breathed. That morning, I set my trap at the Tianshui River. Yuer led 5 riders out as bait, letting Chong scouts spot them and give chase. He drew about 15 enemy riders straight to the riverbank where Ernyo, Gowa, and I were hiding in the tall grass with 100 shield and spear soldiers. The Chong centurion leading the scouts laughed when he saw Yuer's men cornered against the river. Then my soldiers rose from the grass behind him, blocking his escape. Yuer grinned and told them to drop their weapons. The centurion sneered and said 100-foot soldiers couldn't stop Black Mountain riders. Yuer pointed at me walking out from behind the shield wall and said maybe not him, but I could. The centurion wheeled his horse and charged at my line. I drew my bow and put an arrow clean through his horse's skull. The animal dropped dead instantly, sending him tumbling to the ground. Chang'an and a few soldiers had him tied up before he could stand. One rider charged me with his saber raised. I leaped up, drew my ring pommel saber, and took his head off in a single stroke. I ordered the archers to shoot the horses, not the riders. Dozens of arrows brought down every mount. All 15 scouts were thrown to the ground. I rode into them on horseback, saber in hand, and cut down anyone who resisted. Within moments, over half were dead. The last 5 looked at me, covered in their comrades' blood, blade dripping, and threw down their weapons. Yuer laughed and said so much for Chong warriors never surrendering. I had the survivors bound and the dead horses and bodies dumped in the river to hide the evidence. We brought 6 prisoners back to the ranch. I handed them over to Wang Wu and told him I wanted to know everything about the enemy camp. The centurion screamed that they'd never betray Black Mountain. Wang Wu smiled, the kind of smile that makes your skin crawl, and said the great Qin dynasty had 108 torture methods. He told the prisoners he hoped they'd stay quiet, because that way the fun would last longer. The centurion broke before Wang Wu even started. He said he'd tell us everything. I left Wang Wu to his work and headed to Yu Shuang's cabin to finalize tonight's plan. The 10th night had arrived. In the cabin, I laid out the plan after hearing everything Wang Wu had extracted from the prisoners. The enemy camp's northeast corner was their supply depot, grain, weapons, fodder, and their weakest point. I gave the orders. We'd move at the late hour of the night. Every soldier would carry a stick between their teeth to stay silent. Every horse would have its hooves wrapped and mouth muzzled. Yu Shuang and I would lead the 100 cavalry. Ernyo would command the shield and spear soldiers. Gowa would take the saber and bow fighters. We'd stop 3 miles from the camp's northeast side. The cavalry would strike first, followed immediately by the infantry in formation. I made it clear, our main goal was burning their supplies. Killing was secondary. If we destroyed their food and equipment, they'd have no choice but to retreat. This battle would decide Ningxia Fort's fate. After everyone left to prepare, Yu Shuang stayed behind and asked me straight, how confident was I really? I leaned close to her face and asked if she was scared. She turned away, her her ears going red, and snapped that she'd never been afraid of anything in her life. I sat back and told her honestly, 6 or 7 out of 10. She said 2,000 Chang cavalry against our 300 was terrible odds. I told her it didn't matter. We couldn't just sit and watch the fort fall. She blamed herself, said if she'd had 3 months, she could have built a cavalry force to match any Chang unit. I told her that day would come. Deep in the night, we moved. 300 soldiers slithered through the darkness like a black serpent, reaching the tree line 3 miles northeast of the enemy camp. You were confirmed no Chang scouts anywhere nearby. I told the cavalry to walk their horses forward. At 200 meters, mount up and charge at full speed. Yu Shuang and I went ahead on foot first. We crept to the wooden fence surrounding the camp and tied ropes around a section of posts. Then we ran back to our horses. On my signal, several riders and I hauled the ropes. An entire section of fence, 15 meters wide, crashed down. The noise woke the sentries. Before they could shout more than 2 words, 100 horsemen thundered through the gap, like death riding out of the darkness. Yu Shuang and I led the charge, shooting sentries off their towers with our bows as we rode. The whole camp erupted in chaos. We kicked over every fire pit and torch we passed, setting tents ablaze one after another. Chang soldiers stumbled out of their tents half-dressed and half-asleep, straight into our lances and sabers. In the central tent, General Mo Ganshan woke to the sound of hooves shaking the earth. His guards begged him to flee. He screamed for his men to rally, but his soldiers couldn't form up. Fires were spreading everywhere, and my riders were cutting down anyone who emerged. Behind us, Ernyo and Gowa's 200 infantry poured through the breach in the fence and began systematically clearing tents, killing every Chang soldier who stepped outside. Centurion Bergen, the one who'd been wounded in the arm days ago, stumbled out of his tent and recognized our soldiers. Before he could do anything, Gowa's archers put a volley of arrows into him. He fell like a pincushion. Another centurion, Meng Jiar, managed to mount a horse and rally a dozen riders. He charged straight at me. I told Yu Shuang to keep the cavalry burning tents while I handled this group alone. I turned my horse, leveled the black iron lance, and rode to meet them head-on. Up on the fort wall, Ergu spotted the fires erupting in the enemy camp and shouted that we'd started the raid. Wei Ming didn't hesitate. He asked Li Jun how many soldiers could still fight. 200. Wei Ming grabbed his massive blade and said he was going down the mountain to join the killing. He ordered the 200 organized immediately. Down in the camp, I was already deep in the slaughter. Centurion Meng Jiar charged at me with his riders. One exchange was all it took. My lance punched clean through his chest. I flung his body at the other riders. One brave fool screamed about revenge and came at me with his sword raised. I swept my lance sideways and took his head off. Blood sprayed everywhere. The rest of his men broke and ran, screaming that I wasn't human. Something had awakened in me that night. A bloodlust I'd never felt before. Every swing of my lance was lethal. Every Chang soldier who came within 5 meters of me died. Centurion Yi Suda tried to rally his men at the central command tent. I spotted him and charged. His guards tried to block me. I killed them one after another without slowing down. Yi Suda took one look at me cutting through his men and fled toward General Mo Ganshan's position. Yu arrived with about 30 riders. Yu Shuang had sent him to support me while she led the main cavalry force, helping Ernyo and Gowa sweep the camp. Even Yu looked shaken. He said he'd never seen me like this before. I told him to follow me and charge straight at the enemy's command area. Mo Ganshan stood outside his tent surrounded by over 100 gathered riders, the last organized force in the camp. Yisuda pointed at me and told the general I'd already killed 2 of his centurions. Mo Ganshan offered a promotion to 1,000-man captain for whoever brought him my head. 100 Chang horsemen screamed their war cry and thundered toward us. The ground shook. Yuer and his 30 riders flinched. I didn't. I rode straight into them. One sweep of my lance, and 3 heads flew into the night sky simultaneously. The charge faltered. Yuer shouted for his men to throw javelins. 30-some iron spears sailed through the air and punched through over a dozen riders, breaking the enemy formation's momentum completely. I plowed into the middle of them alone, swinging the black iron lance like a whirlwind. Anyone within arm's reach died. In less than a minute, I'd personally killed 30 or 40 men. Yuer's riders flanked from both sides, cutting down another 20 or 30. Mo Ganshan couldn't believe what he was seeing. He screamed for retreat. The surviving few dozen riders wheeled toward the camp gate, and found Wei Ming waiting for them. 200 soldiers from the fort, 100 shield spearmen, and 100 archers stood in perfect formation outside the gate. Wei Ming roared the order, and 100 arrows tore into the fleeing cavalry. Half dropped from their saddles. The rest scattered southeast in panic. Mo Ganshan, protected by a dozen bodyguards, fled into the darkness toward the southeast. Behind him, his entire camp was burning, his army destroyed. I didn't stop. With Yuer's riders behind me, I chased Mo Ganshan's fleeing group without pause. Back at the burning camp, Wei Ming met up with Yu Shuang, Ernyo, and Gowa coming from inside. She asked where I was. Wei Ming told her I'd gone after the enemy general heading southeast toward Linqing County, where the main Black Mountain army was camped. She didn't wait for permission, just told Wei Ming to finish cleaning up the camp and galloped after me with her remaining riders. I caught up to Mo Ganshan's group quickly. He threw his last 2 centurions at me, Batelli and Yisuda, ordering them to buy him time. Tonight's killing had given me over a dozen attribute points. My strength and speed had surged beyond anything I'd felt before. The 2 centurions came at me from both sides with their sabers. 2 thrusts. 2 throats opened. They grabbed their necks as blood poured through their fingers, then fell from their horses together. They'd barely seen my lance move. I told my riders to take their heads and keep chasing. We pursued Mo Ganshan all the way to the outskirts of Linqing County, where the main Black Mountain camp, over 10,000 strong, was stationed. Mo Ganshan screamed at the gate guards to open up. The camp's horns blared. Fires lit up across the horizon. Even the defenders on Linqing's city walls woke up and scrambled to their positions, thinking an attack was coming. Mo Ganshan kept screaming at the gate. It wasn't opening fast enough. I rode up behind him, 20 meters away, my blood-soaked lance gleaming in the firelight. His bodyguards wheeled around to face me. A dozen of them charged. I cut through them in one pass, bodies tumbling from saddles left and right. Mo Ganshan was 10 meters ahead, still screaming. I leveled my lance and thrust. The black iron spearhead punched clean through his back and out his chest. He shrieked and toppled off his horse. I dismounted, pried a golden command medallion from his belt, inscribed 10,000-man Commander Mo Ganshan, with a mountain emblem on the back. By the time Yu Shuang arrived with nearly 100 riders, I was sitting on my horse 100 paces from the Black Mountain camp gate, holding the medallion. I tossed it to her. She read the inscription and her eyes went wide. A 10,000-man general. In Great Qin military law, killing an enemy commander of that rank qualified for a noble title. I called Yuer over and told him to cut off Mo Ganshan's head. We were going home. Then the camp horns changed tone. Yu Shuang recognized the signal, cavalry deployment. The gates swung open. Hundreds of hooves began thundering inside. She said we had to go. Now. I told her to take everyone and ride. I'd stay behind to cover the retreat. She refused. Said if we left together. I pulled rank. As deputy captain, I was ordering her to go. With me standing here alone, I'd draw their attention. With everyone bunched together, I couldn't fight freely. She clenched her jaw, turned her horse, and led the riders northwest toward Ningxin at full gallop. I faced the open gate alone. Hundreds of Chang cavalry were pouring out. I raised my voice until it echoed off the camp walls and the distant city. Who dares fight me? Up on Linqing's walls, the county magistrate stared into the darkness toward the Black Mountain camp and asked his officers a question none of them could answer. Who is that man, standing alone before 10,000 enemies and shouting for a fight? Up on Linqing's city walls, the county magistrate and his officers watched in total confusion. They couldn't understand why someone was fighting alone outside the Black Mountain camp. They guessed I might be from Ningxin Fort, but couldn't figure out how that was possible since the fort was supposed to be under siege. A Chang centurion led several hundred riders out and surrounded me. Then one of Mo Ganshan's surviving bodyguards rode up and told the centurion what had happened. I'd killed the 10,000-man general plus 4 centurions. Meng Jiaer, Bargan, Batelli, and Yisuda, all dead by my hand. The centurion was so shocked he forgot to give the attack order. I used that moment. I cut off Mo Ganshan's head, stuffed it in my saddlebag, and charged straight at the weakest point in their circle. My lance swept through 2 riders, heads flying, and I broke through. Thousands of Chang cavalry poured out of the camp and chased me across the open plains. I galloped northwest, killing anyone who got close. After dozens of miles, their main force stopped at the border of Nan'an district. They had orders not to cross. But about 100 stubborn riders kept coming. I yanked my horse around and faced them. They thought they had me. Their centurion screamed for the kill. I charged back into them. My first thrust skewered 2 men at once, ran the lance clean through both their bodies. Then I went berserk. My blood was boiling. Every muscle felt like it was bursting with power. I cut through them like a storm, killing over a dozen in seconds. The centurion, watching from the edge, turned white as a sheet. When I started riding toward him, he broke and fled back toward the main army. The scene was absurd. 100 riders had been chasing me, and now I was chasing them. Centurion Zhuormeng saw his men fleeing back in terror and couldn't understand what was happening. The centurion who'd led the pursuit lied and said I had endless strength and had killed half their men single-handedly. I stopped my horse 100 paces from their thousands of riders and shouted one more time, "Who dares fight me?" Zhuormeng was about to order a charge when I simply turned and rode away, vanishing into the darkness. He realized I'd been bluffing, buying time for my people to escape, but he was too afraid of an ambush to follow. By dawn, I rode out of the morning mist toward the captured Chang camp at the base of Ningxia Mountain. Hundreds of soldiers stood in formation at the gate, chanting my name. Chang'an was there, rubbing his red eyes, trying not to cry. He whispered that he'd known I'd come back. You were asked if the Chang had followed. I told him I'd led them on a huge loop, slaughtered another batch, and they were too scared to chase anymore. Yu Shuang stood with her arms crossed, face cold as ice. She was still angry that I'd pulled rank and ordered her to leave me behind. She muttered something about me being reckless and foolish. I just smiled. We'd won. The camp was ours, the general was dead, and I was alive. That was enough. Ernyo whispered that if I'd been any later, Yu Shuang was about to ride out looking for me. I caught the slight pout on her face and smiled to myself. Tough on the outside, soft underneath. Wei Ming leaned on his big sword and told everyone to head back to the fort. But Gowa stopped us. He'd captured a Chang officer who claimed to be a centurion named Dawar and was begging to talk. Wei Ming stared at the bound, trembling man and said to just kill him. A centurion's head was worth 1,000 taels. Dawar panicked and said he had vital intelligence and wanted to surrender. He claimed he'd never killed any Qian civilians, never touched any women, and that his mother was actually from Great Qian. He was half Qian blood. I told Wei Ming to keep him alive. I had questions. We also captured over 1,000 warhorses from the camp. I told Yuer to move them to the ranch in batches, watching for Chang scouts along the way. Back in the command hall, I questioned Dawar. He was shaking so hard, he could barely speak. I told him to relax. We wouldn't kill him. Then he dropped a bombshell. In about a month, when the 3 tribal armies were preparing to return to the grasslands, they planned to launch surprise attacks on 3 county towns in the final 10 days. Black Mountain would hit Linqing County. White Wolf would strike Sheikh County. Iron Barbarian would attack Beishan County near Copper Mountain Fort. The room went dead silent. Wei Ming's face darkened. If this was true, 3 entire counties were about to be massacred. Li Jun said we couldn't do anything about it. We were too weak. Ergu said we should report to the provincial governor immediately. Chun Feng shook his head. If the governor had wanted to fight the tribes, he would have sent troops long ago. He'd clearly made some kind of deal. I stayed calm and asked Dawar for numbers. Black Mountain had brought 20,000 total. 5,000 had come to Ningxia, leaving 15,000 outside Linqing. Iron Barbarian also had 20,000. White Wolf brought 30,000. 70,000 Chang warriors in total across Anxi district. Ergu nearly fell off his chair. No wonder the governor wouldn't fight. Then Dawar added something even worse. This year's invasion was just a probe. Next spring, the 3 tribes planned to gather 200,000 warriors for a full-scale war against Great Qian. That would flatten all of Liang province. I asked how they'd taken West Mountain Pass in the first place. Dawar explained that after years of peace, the pass garrison had grown complacent. The 3 tribes disguised soldiers as Nalan tribe merchants, sending small groups of 20 or 30 through the pass over time. When enough were inside, they launched a coordinated attack and opened the gates. I thought of Nalan Cheer, the princess I'd rescued in the mountains. I asked about her tribe. Dawar said the Nalan had been crushed by the 3 tribes, with only a few survivors fleeing deep into the Tian Shan Mountains. I decided to keep Dawar alive. I renamed him Wang Niehu, Wang the Barbarian Destroyer, and assigned him to Ernyo. I warned Ernyo that if the prisoner escaped, I'd hold him personally responsible. Wei Ming looked at me and asked what we should do next. He'd fully accepted me as the real decision-maker of Ningxia Fort. I told him we'd stay put for now. Keep gathering refugees from the forests, take as many as we could. Send scouts to watch the Black Mountain camp closely. If they were really planning to attack Linqing, they'd need to build siege equipment first, and that would be our warning sign. The immediate crisis was over, but the bigger storm was just beginning. Li Jun asked if we should warn the 3 county towns. I said yes, send messengers to all 3 counties, plus Copper Mountain Fort and Governor Qin. But we couldn't do it yet. If the tribes caught wind that we knew their plan, they'd change it. Better to wait 2 weeks before sending warnings. Wei Ming tallied up the spoils from the raid. Over 2,000 stones of grain, tens of thousands of taels and silver, tens of thousands of strings of copper coins, and a chest of gold bars. Total value, roughly 300,000 taels. Most of it came from Mo Ganshan's personal stash in the command tent. Wei Ming said he'd served his whole life and never seen that much money in one place. I'd almost forgotten. Mo Ganshan's head was still in my saddlebag. Wei Ming's eyes bulged when I mentioned it casually. He said killing a 10,000-man commander was enough to earn me a noble title, county baron at minimum. I joked that I'd been hoping for Viscount. Yu Shuang told me not to push my luck. Gowar raised a good point. Would the Black Mountain tribe abandon their plan to attack Linqing and come after us instead? I said no. We'd just wiped out their 5,000-man detachment, and they had no idea how many troops we actually had. They wouldn't risk another assault on our mountain fortress. Linqing was a much richer prize. Women, gold, food, laborers, and I suspected they'd already planted spies inside the city walls. I told Wei Ming to keep the blacksmiths forging weapons around the clock and have the women's workshop turning captured leather armor into our simplified bright armor. He agreed and put Old Li in charge. After everyone left, I told Wei Ming privately to hold back the battle report for now. I didn't want the news reaching the capital too quickly. A victory this spectacular would attract powerful eyes, and we were still too small to survive that kind of attention. He understood and said we'd collect our rewards later, every last coin. 3 quiet days passed. I was at the ranch studying maps of Anxi district with Yu Shuang when Yuer burst in saying someone had come looking for me. A man named Lei Qianshan, former deputy commander of West Mountain Pass. I went to the valley entrance and found him. He was enormous, 2 meters tall, bronze-skinned, with a jaw that looked carved from granite. He dropped to one knee and told me his story. When the pass fell, he'd fought his way out with his surviving soldiers and fled into the mountains to hide from both Chong hunters and imperial punishment. He'd heard about our 2 victories and come to offer his service. Wei Ming had sent him to me. 800 frontier soldiers, real veterans, not green recruits, wanted to join us. But I understood immediately what Wei Ming was doing. These men were technically criminals. Losing West Mountain Pass was a capital offense. Taking them in meant I was harboring fugitives from imperial law. If things went wrong, my head would be on the block alongside theirs. The only way to make it work was to win big enough that the court would overlook everything. More victories, more enemy heads, more glory, enough to trade for 800 pardons. I looked at Lei Qianshan kneeling before me. 800 battle-hardened border soldiers. Real warriors who'd fought Chong cavalry for years. Combined with my growing forces at the ranch and the fort, this would change everything. I made my decision. You're 800 men. I'll take them all. Lei Qianshan's face broke into relief. He swore that he and his brothers would follow me anywhere, through fire and flood, without hesitation. I asked Lei Qianshan how many of his men could ride horses. He said most of them could. Then he dropped another surprise. Besides his 800 soldiers, there were over 3,000 villagers hiding in the mountains too. Wei Ming had told him to ask me what to do with them. 3,000 refugees. When Lei explained that most were strong young men with only a few elderly and women, I made my decision quickly. Pick 1,000 of the strongest and send them to the ranch. The other 2,000 go to Ningxia Fort. He thanked me with obvious relief. He'd been afraid I'd turn them away. 2 days later, the fort's blacksmith force had tripled to over 300. With that many hands, weapons production doubled. Old Li told me he could meet all my equipment orders within 20 days. I looked at those shirtless smiths hammering away in the heat and felt genuine respect. They were grateful too. In our fort, they ate full meals, earned wages, and didn't have to fear being dragged off by Chong raiders. Yu Shuang had finished selecting 100 strong women from the fort's population to form a female combat unit. I asked if she'd train them as cavalry or infantry. She said both. Mounted fighters who could charge on horseback and kill on foot. I gave her a thumbs up. On the ride back to the ranch, she asked if I was planning to help defend Linqing County against the Black Mountain tribe. I corrected her, not defend, destroy them. She stared at me and asked if I planned to do it with just our 2,000 ranch soldiers. I reminded her the fort had another 1,000, plus Linqing had several thousand garrison troops. So maybe 6 or 7,000 total against 15,000 Chong cavalry. She asked if I was planning another night raid. I shook my head. That trick had worked twice, but a third time was out of the question. Black Mountain wouldn't be caught sleeping again. She demanded to know my real plan. I smiled and told her she'd find out when the time came. She muttered something about wanting to kick me off my horse. When we rode into the valley, the sight took my breath away. 2,100 soldiers stood in perfect formation on the training ground. 800 border veterans, 1,000 new recruits, and 300 of my existing troops. Wang Wu bellowed my arrival, and every single man dropped to one knee. "Hail, Commander!" I told them to stand. Wang Wu whispered that this was about establishing authority, making sure every man knew who fed them and who fought for them. I joked that if the imperial court saw this, they'd think I was building a rebel army. Wang Wu mentioned quietly that he'd already sent a secret letter to the imperial capital along with Mo Ganshan's head, as I'd instructed. Whether anyone would reply was uncertain. I smiled and said no reply might actually be better. I appointed Lei Qianshan as military envoy, a demotion from his former rank of deputy commander at West Mountain Pass, but he accepted without complaint. He said just being taken in was more than he deserved. I told him not to blame himself for the pass falling. Bringing 800 men out alive through enemy territory was no small feat. His eyes went red. He told me his life belonged to me now. I tapped his chest with my fist and told him to save it. "Your life is for retaking West Mountain Pass." He swore he would, for his dead brothers and for every civilian who'd suffered. Then Yu Shuang walked up beside me and ordered Sun Daniu to have her 100 female soldiers fall in. They marched onto the field and formed 2 crisp lines. Our force was growing. Over 2,000 at the ranch, 1,000 at the fort, and more coming every day. The question wasn't whether we could fight anymore. The question was whether we could win big enough to change the entire war.